We have different ecologies. So you have the nervous system, which is something that you can specifically train. You have the connective tissue. We also have red muscle tissue. This is what I was seeing at Westside. You guys were so good at scaling up the nervous system that I was seeing shit on my end blow up.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is John Quint. Before I get into who you are and so forth, I want to let the listeners know that I think this is going to be one of the best podcasts that they can listen to be able to up their game with strength and hypertrophy, as well as injury prevention. Some of these words like injury prevention, we're going to get into the weeds of it because it's actually kind of stupid. But I've seen the work that you've done with other people and have kind of followed your work over the years as well. And there's a gap that we're going to talk about that I think a lot of people will just see as like mobility or prehab or rehab, but it's not integrated in to the training. And as we've seen, especially with the strength athletes, at a period of time, it's going to bite you in that butt and you're not going to be able to progress because you're going to get hurt. From the hypertrophy standpoint, and we'll get into the weeds of that can still be the case, but they may also not be activating the muscle to the degree that they think that they're activating the muscle because of that. So that I want the listeners to be aware of, as we move forward, that I'm going to ask you about, how you came into all this, because the context is going to matter. Because a lot of things that you're going to say, or say other practitioners in the field will say, kind of like goes over everybody's head, as you've known coming up through the whole thing, because they haven't walked the walk and they don't have the context or the experience to be able to say what's really going on, right? And through that, it will lead into how this whole evolution has brought you to how you work with linemen, which is like powerlifting strength athletes, what they have to do, there's more modalities. So it's not really the powerlifting strength athletes, right? So I suppose I would say you're a neuromuscular therapist / strength coach.
Yeah.
Would be the easiest way to kind of define that.
Yeah.
And coming up through bodybuilding first, and then kind of working in Westside. So I want to kind of go back into bodybuilding before you started getting into the, I don't want to say therapeutic side, because it's really, this is what I want to try to avoid with the listeners, right? Is to understand that this isn't like ART, MAT, all like here's the therapy, then here's the training. This is a whole integrated approach, which interestingly enough, over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen a lot of the things that you've been talking about kind of creep its way in, but not really know what's creeping its way in. Lengthened partials, for instance, are now becoming this topic, right? So in a lot of these things, have been, even when I was at Westside, the good morning was used kind of as a form of chaos training. Like what happens when you fall out of the groove of a squat or a deadlift? Well, it's the good morning. And people would see that as, oh, you're just trying to build your back. It's kinda, but we're actually trying to put ourselves in a position that would be a worst case position if the squat goes south. And then to strengthen that. And a lot of the movements that Louie would put in there were like that. Then if we get back into some of the other things like the ultra high reps, 100 rep tricep push downs, 100 rep reverse band presses, it was all in there. I don't want to say by accident, but because so many other things tried and didn't work, but then those things work, and why they work, and actually how to make it better. So with the bodybuilding, what got you into bodybuilding from the jump?
Realistically, so I was fortunate. My dad is a physical education teacher and coach, and I was a September birthday. So like I was always the youngest one, right?
He didn't hold you back.
Yeah, right. So
what a dick.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I remember he told me like early on, hey, like listen, like these kids are gonna have an advantage, so you're gonna have to start to train, right? And I got into training at a really young age, and you know, I grew up in Columbus, right? And firstly, like, let me say, I've been following your work too, right? And so much stuff that I've learned from you guys. Like when I say you guys, it's kind of like, you know, I look at it as, you know, when I was at Westside and working with all the lifters, and I still work with a lot of lifters. I remember Louie told me, he was telling me a specific story about, and I can't remember. You may be able to add the context to it, but it was essentially like somebody that challenged him to like a bench press meet. He came back to the bench press meet, and he was like, that guy didn't learn anything from me, but I learned from him. Right. And so, you know, when, you know, being young, being you know, in the therapeutic setting, let's say, right? Like I remember going like, wow, like Louie, like he was always a student. He's like you, he's always right. And so that was something that really, you know, just always made me know that like, hey, I'm always going to be a student. Right. So having that mindset, getting back to the specific question you asked me, right? So my dad got me involved in training really early on. And I remember, I don't know if you've ever been to the Power Shack in Hilliard. Yeah. Okay, so I remember, because I still treat Phil, the guy that owns it, and his kid, right? And I remember going there, and my dad, you know, I was outside playing. My dad's like, hey, we're going to the gym. So I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize I was going to train. And, you know, they just had like a white Cybex circuit area. Remember when like gyms would set up like that, and you just go from machine to machine, right? And so I remember being on the hamstring machine. Essentially like that hamstring machine over here that you have, just lying hamstring machine. And I'm doing, next thing I know, it's like burning, and I get off the machine and I'm like, oh shit, man. Like, I didn't say that because I was like fifth grade, right? But I'm like, I think I hurt myself. And then I remember my dad telling me like, no, it's supposed to be like that. And so I think exposing myself to that and like maybe like the fifth and the sixth grade. And then after starting to understand that like, hey, this is what training is, right? I had a respect for it, if that makes sense. Yeah. It kind of hooked me early on where it's like, hey, I'm going to have to do this. And then, you know, as you're seeing the benefits, you know, when you're playing athletics and you're training, and it's like, yeah, well, all these kids are technically bigger than me, but now I'm starting to actually catch up. Right. And then, you know, you hit that point where the, you know, essentially, you know, you're training and then you're starting to get an asymmetrical advantage from the training. Yes. And then you really start to buy in. And then next thing you know, more than football or wrestling, you're like, I kind of like training.
Yeah. I was going to ask when that happened, because when you start young, the fun thing about that is your skill set really doesn't have to be better than everybody else at that age. If you're stronger, you're just pushing people all over the place. Yeah. Right. And then as you mature, you know, and skill sets start to come in a little bit, it can work against you. But normally for most, that's not going to happen until after late high school or later, where on the flip side is, and I don't know how much this happens today, but I'm sure it was still happening when you were coming up. The kids that were just killing it in junior high usually never played in high school. It was just because they matured faster. Right. And then when the other ones matured, but I always use the analogy of when you play football and you're the crappiest kid on the team, you know, the coach in Pee Wee or junior high is going to play the good ones and say, you just go over there and do the drills. You know, so you're just doing drills and drills and drills and drills. But then you mature and those other kids never did the drills, so they didn't have the reps. Yeah. Now, when you get stronger and you mature, you're killing them and they're like, hey, I was the superstar. Now I suck. I'm just going to quit. And so I saw a lot of that. Yeah. But for myself, it happens early, man. The training became more important than the sport for me. And it was like the sport's just like this crappy off season that I have to do where I can't power lift. Did that kind of happen to you?
Yeah, 100%, man, where it's like, because then think about it too, like one of the nice feedback about training, right, is you're getting feedback every time when you start to get into a routine of training every week. So you're seeing progression, you're seeing your body change, you're seeing numbers go up, right? And then you go into season and it's like, I like all this hard work that I did, you see it start to get stripped away, right? And obviously the higher up that you are, the more gets stripped away, right? So maybe kids that didn't train as diligently, let's say, maybe they don't notice it that, hey, like this off season is really stalling my progression in the gym, right? And, I mean, just like you and so many other people, I just kind of got hooked to it. And then, and then it kind of, my dad was interested in it. So like, I remember being in middle school, doing Charles Poliquin arm training.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? And then like, he wrote the books so that, I could kind of read it, and my dad would show me the books, and I'm starting to understand what we're doing, not to like, obviously a large degree. Right. But like, you're just, and by the time, and so like all that training essentially paid off. And so I went to college originally to play football. Well, like that was kind of a drag because the team wasn't really good. So I grew up on the west side of Columbus. So I went to Reedy. We had a real good football team, right? And then you go from a real good football team to essentially like a losing team, you know what I mean? And then it's like, and then I'm also taking time from training. And then I started to, I met a bodybuilder at the gym, and I'm training with him, and he's telling me, hey, you should do this instead of that. Right. And so, like, that's kind of the, I guess, inflection point where it's kind of like, yeah, I think I have more potential with bodybuilding, but I also enjoy it more.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, football was kind of like inconvenient. And then, nothing against team sports. I love team sports. We have multiple businesses. It's a team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But like, when you're relying on other people that are
yes.
Right. And you start to see that, and it's like, why is it affecting me so much? I want a little bit more control over, I guess, maybe my athletic success.
Yes. Especially when you know that you're putting in the work, but the person next to you on the line's not.
Yeah.
And you end up losing. For me, that was a problem.
For sure.
It was a big problem. It's like, fuck you guys. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, 100%.
Pull your game up. And one season they did, then it would fall off again.
Right.
The same situation when I went into college the first year. I had the intent, to play, and it was very small, Tiffin University, very small college, and went from a successful season, into walking the first week of practice, just looking around. And it's like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm not on scholarship. And if anything was like books and shit like that, it's like, this isn't worth this. The people I played high school with were better. This isn't worth the injury that could impact the powerlifting, which I cared way more about. And it was just like, see ya, check out.
100%.
And so the bodybuilding sort of came about just because you ran into another body. Because Columbus is interesting because there's the bodybuilding subculture, then there's the powerlifting subculture. The bodybuilding subculture at that time was a little more spread out. The powerlifting subculture was pretty much planted it was a little spread out, but it was planted at Westside. And then there might have been like a little crew, Worlds North, right? Worthington, very, very small crew. And then I think really the only place Louie let people go to do like extra accessory work where you saw George, and it's just for extra workouts and stuff like that. But it was a hard subculture to kind of get into. Where the bodybuilding was, you had people out there. How many world gyms at the time? Like 6. You had a few in each world gym. Yeah. So that's what. So, because you did well in bodybuilding. Yeah. So as you were progressing up through that, I assume that when you started, I believe when I was listening to one of the podcasts you were on, the first Mr. Ohio, you really didn't even know what you were doing. Yeah. Yeah. You're 100% right. Yeah. So, which is a big show. Yeah. Did you know it was a big show back then? No, man, that's where it's like being ignorant, right? Like I think a lot of that pays off, right? Like, I can talk more about that, but yeah, so I didn't know. And I remember thinking like, in football, we were so close to, winning a state title that I remember thinking like, okay, there's something there about the state title. And so I just kind of wanted to see where I was. So yeah, to your point, realistically, what happened was I signed up for the Mr. Ohio, and I'm at essentially what was World Gym North, which is now changed to Metro, right? But that's where like someone like Mike Francois, to your point, right? Who I'm sure right? They were all there. Yeah. So he was there, and Mike Davies was out of there who promoted, a lot of women's fitness and stuff like that. And so everybody was kind of there. And I remember there was the original guy that got me into bodybuilding. His name was Gary Sailors. Okay. And he built golf courses. And it's funny. I remember going up to him at the gym.
because at that point in time, I was no longer training with my dad, right? Because I was in college. And so I'm essentially at the Power Shack in Westerville. Okay. And as I'm training, I'm kind of doing my own stuff, but I'm like, I know that I need something else and I want to get exposed to something else. And, it's a Division III football program. So it's like, like nobody's really training hard there, right?
Yeah,
so like, I can't be there wasting my time, right? So when I went to Westerville, I remember they were doing walking lunges and there's like all these other guys laying around and this one guy doing it, right? And so to your point of being just like naive and being, essentially 18 years old, right? I go up to him, I'm like, hey man, like, are you training for bodybuilding? And he kind of like laughs at me. He wore the old bodybuilding gear. So I kind of knew, and he's like, yeah. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I train with you? You know what I mean? He's like, kind of like laughs like this kid's an idiot, right? And then he was like, yeah, for sure. We train legs on Wednesday, right? And so like, I don't know anything, right? Like I'm super like, and so I'm like, okay, perfect. Like what time? So like, and I'm a freshman in college. So my whole week is now kind of around this. So then I go back and I'm sitting there thinking like, and at the time, Paul Key was training at the gym. He was training bench presses. So there was some strong guys and there was like a little subculture of benchers at that location too, and we would train so they would be doing the bench, we would be training legs, right? And it's funny, I kind of like figured out that like the logic behind it was like we weren't done until he killed me. Do you know what I mean? And so then as I'm starting to get this, and like I'm essentially just taking the brunt. Like I remember the first leg session, I was so sore, I went up to do work at the library. And like, dude, I can barely move my legs. And I'm just like, oh my God. So he opened up my world to essentially, I don't know, maybe even more of a work ethic that it takes to be able to excel at that sport. And I was kind of hooked with that. And then he was like, well, I'm going to get back into bodybuilding. So then he's now training for a show. Right. And so I got to see what that was like. Right. And he was kind of like a rougher, like he was he built golf courses. He was a business owner. So like, he didn't really, like, he wasn't there to make friends. Yeah. Right. And so I remember when to your point, to kind of circle back, when I was getting ready to leave for football, for football camp my sophomore year, I remember he told me, he's like, hey, you shouldn't do this. And this was like the first nice thing this dude had ever said to me. You know what I mean? And so like, yeah, you shouldn't. It made me think. And he was like, I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, listen, I don't know how good you are in football. He's like, but I also know that you're like Division III Otterbein. He's like, and I'm pretty sure that like you could be a lot more successful in bodybuilding, probably because the entire time he was just trying to kill me to a degree. And then he was like, okay, he's lingered around, right? And so then when I went to camp, like camp didn't go well. I just didn't want to be there, right? So I was very disruptive. I was a problem for people, right? And so they were like, hey, we'll give you a break because at the time, I was on the top of the depth chart, so it was kind of a hard, like, listen, it's Division III, so it's not like, I'm not trying to shit on Division III, but right, like it's not like you're saying, like I don't get it. Right. So, and so then I ended up, they gave me a break to come home from school, to come home from camp, we had a 2-week break, and they were like, instead of going to scrimmage, like, we'll let you, and I talked to my mom and I told my mom, I'm like, listen, like, like, I'm not just quitting football to quit football. Cause everybody's like, oh, we see all this potential in football, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, listen, I'm not quitting to not do something. I'm quitting because like I'm committed to bodybuilding, right? And so that's when she was like, well, if you think that this is what you're gonna do, she essentially kind of gave me the green light, because obviously my dad didn't like that, right? To a degree, obviously he quickly got over it, right? But initially it's like, it looks like you're quitting something, but I'm just kind of like, hey, this is the end of that, and now I want to transition into this. And so then at that point in time, that's when we were at Power Shack, and then we left Power Shack and Gary went to essentially what you're referring to as World North, which was still World Gym at the time. Okay, so we went to that gym, and then I got exposed to kind of like the culture that you're talking about, because that was high level, like these are like high level bodybuilders. And so when I get there, I meet a guy named Jack Ohlers, because like him and like Mike Davies are coming up to me and they're kind of like, hey, you should do bodybuilding. Just because that, like, not because I stood out so much, that was just kind of the thing that you do, right? Like if somebody comes here and they start doing really well, it's like, hey, you should do a powerlifting meet, right? And so I didn't know anything. So to your point, like when I did the first Mr. Ohio, I had no idea there was a novice class. I had no idea that like you're supposed to like weigh your food. Do you know what I mean? Like, the internet wasn't really, I mean, it was probably big, but I wasn't on it. And like social media didn't really exist. So it was like this kind of weird point where it's like, I remember talking backstage to certain guys and they're like, oh yeah, we're like 6 ounces of this. And I'm like, how do you guys know that it's 6 ounces? And they're like, well, you know what I mean? And then that's when I was like, holy shit. And so I got sixth. And then I remember that's when then I ended up hooking up with Jack, and he helped me with my diet and actually organized it, right? And there was a lot of, at the time, I was fortunate too. And here's the reason why, because Francois, Chris Aceto, who's the nutritionist that, he's very popular. Well, he worked directly with Francois. And so he wrote a book called Everything That You Need to Know About Fat Loss. Very simple book. All the principles are still highly effective. I still use a lot of that logic today. And so essentially it put me on like that type of protocol. Well, then, because the Ohio is essentially like in September, and then Mother's Day is when the Francois was. So then I signed up for the novice class. Okay. And I weighed my food. Because as soon as I got done there, I was like, because they'd be like, oh, well, don't do it because you need an off season. But I was like, well, I fucked this thing up so bad. Yeah. I didn't really count it. I was just like, hey, this is like just a learning experience. And I learned that like I wasn't dieting how I should and all this other stuff. And so then once I got onto that diet, I turned around, I did the novice class, and this was when the novice class was open. So there's like 40 or 50 guys in the class. Well, I won the novice class. And then it's like I get maybe second or third in the men's open. Right. And I'm like, oh, fuck, weighing your food really does matter. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so then it gave me feedback to go, oh, well, there's probably a lot of other things that I can really improve on. Right. And I was so young at that first point that I had like, based off of the training background that I had a huge advantage. Right. Because I'd been exposed to, Charles Poliquin. Now I'm seeing how this other guy's training. Right. And that's essentially how I got into bodybuilding.
Well, there's also and we can dive deeper into it as we get deeper in this conversation. There's also the base that you built through the drills and so forth associated with football that you were doing.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's a lot of special strengths that are being developed there, which will correspond later, which is one of the gaps that we're going to talk about that kind of fall into that whole thing. Yeah. But the connective tissue was probably a little bit better adapted than those who didn't play, which is going to kind of play into all that.
For sure.
And so as you're moving forward in bodybuilding, because I mean, you had Francois, you had Meadows, was still, that would have been that time like right post surgery.
Okay. So what happens is I compete for maybe another year. But the issue that I have from what everyone was telling me, right, because I'm still a novice. Yeah. And essentially what's happening is like, I'm able to because at the time they had a junior division. So this was in a time in bodybuilding when it's like, if you were a male, you only competed in bodybuilding. Yes, right. Yeah. So it's like, you're getting guys that have like super good like some of these guys that, don't have to maybe train so hard, that are in a different class. Like those guys were all getting pushed into bodybuilding. So that's why the classes were so big, right? Like if you remember back in the day, like some of these classes that you're in are like 40, 60 guys.
No, they're huge. There's no physique. There's
classic
the other
bodybuilding.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I would, and there was a junior division. So like, I did, I think it's the Mid-Atlantic Grand Prix, and I win the junior division, but then it's like, I'm getting, and I can win my class, but I can't win an overall. And everybody's going like, listen, it's just because you're young, you're not hard enough in regards to like the tissues. It's like, you're not right. Like you just need more time. That's what everybody said. Hey, you need more time. But so what ended up happening was, I'm talking to Chris Dotson at the gym, who now works with Serrano. They do like hyperbaric stuff. He was a really good bodybuilder.
Staying hydrated is huge for training and performance. And this is why today's episode is brought to you by Element. Element gives you exactly what your body needs: 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium, 0 sugar, and no junk. Personally, I like to mix half a pack with my morning oatmeal. I'll use any of the chocolate flavors. I drink it with all my training sessions, watermelon being my favorite. Some other reasons why I use it is stable energy with no crash. It fights off fatigue and cramps, improves mental focus and clarity, helps regulate stress, and supports deeper sleep. And there's no sugar and garbage. Here's the best part. You can try it totally risk-free. Right now, Element is offering a free 8-count sample pack of its most popular flavors with each purchase. You get 2 of each of these 4 fan favorites, perfect for finding your own favorite or sharing with a friend. Don't like it, give it to a salty friend, and Element will give you your money back. Head over to www.drinklmnt.com/table talk.
And so he's telling me, hey, you should reach out to this guy named John Meadows. And once again, like, this is like prior to the internet really knowing anything. So I essentially, like, I'm like, Chris Dotson reaches out for me, Jack reaches out to me, but like, I'm not hearing anything back. Right. And essentially they're like, listen, this guy knows how to get the look that you probably need. So like, whatever this guy is doing, like, you can probably like he can probably show you some things that push you to, right. And so what ended up happening was Meadows just had surgery. Okay, so he finally returns my call because I think the same thing happens. I do another show, I win my class, I lose the overall, right? I'm losing the overall to guys that are in, like, you know, like my age now. Yeah. Right? Where it's just like, dude, these guys are like, they've had the muscle for 20 years.
So you're hearing the whole muscle maturity thing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And judges are, I never really went to judges. I just had other guys that competed tell me, like, hey, this is what you're missing. This is what you're missing. And so what ended up happening is Meadows finally is like, hey, he'll meet me up. So I end up meeting Meadows at the Cup-O Joe at Easton, and this is post-surgery. So I don't know his history per se, right? I just know that like, people were telling me, hey, he had a health issue or whatever. And so I meet up with him. It's a Friday. We talk about it, and he's like, yeah, let's start training on Saturday at that Lifetime Fitness at Easton. So that's when I started training at the Lifetime Fitness in Easton, and that was like right when he was post-surgery. So when I saw him, he didn't look anything like like what most people would think that he looks like. Like, he hadn't, and that was really good for me to see too, because you know, he taught me so much in regards to like I remember the first time he went to go under a bar after he had that surgery because he blew his mesh out. Right. And I remember him saying, like, hey, you're going to have to hold me. Because at the time it was just me and him, because I was in school for neuromuscular therapy. And I remember holding his pelvis and dude, he's shaking like a leaf. And I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. I saw when we would do leg extensions, you know, he started with one plate, and like, he was so untrained, and so from all the trauma that he went through. Right. And then to see him like work his way back to get to the point, right, was a really good experience for me as well.
So what was it like for you? Because to just go into that Lifetime, and the story I have with that is I went out there, I think twice, to be able to train with him, because he was coming out on the weekends to train. He's like, you got to come train. And I'm like, what, you know, I'm like walking in there, and there's like the child care, then there's all this other stuff, and then there's a pool. I'm like, John, I don't know if I can do this, man. You know, I can't. And then after the second one, I'm like, I can't. You know? And you're coming from basically more hardcore gyms. And this was this 100% commercial, but they had enough good stuff in there. I don't want to knock it too bad. They had everything in there that he needed, you know, to be able to use, but it worked for him because of the child care and all the other kind of, it wasn't as bad as I'm making it out, but it was a radical difference from walking into a world gym.
It was, totally different. And to your point, one of the other reasons why I had to do it, the reason why it technically worked well for me is because Metro, which is World, right? The World, we'll just go with World because it's the same. We're talking about the same thing, just different. But I was in school. So like, they would close down. I wouldn't be able to train. And at the time they were open 24 hours. Right. So like, beggars can't be choosers. Right. But yeah, I mean, it was totally different. And, you know, I remember that's what he would kind of always say, like, hey, I know this isn't where, because, you know, I remember, there's a guy named Travis Brandstetter who won the Mr. Ohio one of the years, actually, when he won the overall. So one of the years, the second time I competed in the Mr. Ohio, Meadows won his class, I won my class, and Travis Brandstetter won his class. And then Travis ended up winning the overall. Okay. And he was the light heavyweight. Meadows was the heavyweight. And at that time I was a super heavy. And essentially, I remember this was the crazy thing. So I remember, because I had a strong bench press. Okay. And so I remember, I'd be able to do 405 on the incline like it was easy at Lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember talking to Travis, because Travis is like, "You're going over there?" And I go, "Well, yeah, that's where Meadows trains." And at the time he was working with Chase Bank. Right. And so I was like, "Yeah, like that's where I have to go." Like, you know what I mean? And he's like, "Yeah, but the weights over there are fake." And I'm like, "What do you mean?"
Yeah.
Right? And he's like, "Bro, those weights are fake." And I had only been training chest over there.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's funny, like it's 405. And so I'm like, "Oh man, I'm like crazy strong." And then I go back to Metro. Right. And I remember like jumping to 405 quickly, and everyone's like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And then they hand it to me and I'm like, "Oh, well, these weights are totally different."
Are they really?
Yeah. Because the other thing that was funny is I remember when I first went to, yeah, man, I wish Meadows was here, because when I first went there and he was like, "Hey, let's do some dumbbells." And they only go up to 120. But like, dude, the dumbbells are like, I don't know if they're aerodynamic or whatnot, but I remember Travis came with me and we're like, "Hey, we'll all train together." So I remember Meadows was like, he's like, "Okay, hey, do the 90s." And the 90s feel like 60. And so then we work all the way up to 120, right? And we're like banging out like 10, 12 reps.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "All right, just stop doing them." Right. And that's when I remember he's like, "I told you these weights are fake." Right. Because if you try to pull that 120 over there, you're not doing the same volume or the same amount of output. Right. But yeah. So yeah, training at Lifetime was a unique experience for sure.
So was your path then to use the Ohio to go to like the North Americans, or were you trying to pursue the collegiate route?
Yeah. So then what ended up happening was I did the Ohio.
Yeah.
And then Meadows won collegiates. Meadows won collegiate nationals. So I remember Meadows, and that's part of the thing that drew me to him, because I'm like, well, now I'm back in school, because I also did my internship. I did like a lot of independent studies, and then I did my internship at Ohio State Football Performance. When I was at Football Performance, Doug Davis, who was a strength coach, unfortunately he's passed, but he was a strength coach that was at OSU, and he was kind of he was my mentor there, even though like I was technically under Tressel and Lichter, right? Like Doug Davis was the one that was like, was more my mentor. And he told me, he's like, "Hey, if you want to do the strength and conditioning thing, like you're going to have to get your master's." And I need to think of a way to like say that. And the school that I went to wasn't known for exercise science.
Yeah.
So like I didn't get the education that's why I did so many independent studies, is because I'm like, listen, like I'm not learning what I feel like I need to do, like need to learn. Right. And so that's why I did all these independent studies. And then and so Doug Davis told me, "Hey, you're going to have to get your master's if you want to be in strength and conditioning." Well, I talked to my guidance counselor back from school, because I did all those independent studies, and then I did like the distinction program and all this stuff. And so I was close with her and she was like, "Hey, you should go back to school for neuromuscular therapy. So if you're going to go to school for anything, go back to school for neuromuscular therapy." Yeah. Well, I was going to school for neuromuscular therapy when I was training with Meadows. And that's when Meadows was like, "You need to do collegiate nationals." Okay.
Well, the other thing here, not to skip over, is being part of that strength and conditioning program also exposed you to what that life is actually like, right? And when I was in college and saw what that life was like, I was like, "Nah, I'm okay. I don't want to do this 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. Was that kind of the same thing?
Yeah, it was rough, man.
Yeah,
it was rough, and
I don't think a lot of people understand. They want to go to school. They all want to be a strength coach.
Yep.
But Division I strength coach, probably 2 as well. But they don't understand what that really looks like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's a grind. Yeah. So to your point, it's like, first lifting group would be at 6 a.m. And then, we had 4 lifting groups. So somebody would have to come open up the facility. So you're there, and then, it's like, I naively kind of thought, okay, well, I'm just gonna be working with the football team. Well, it's like, well, no, there's recruiting, and now there's camps, and there's high school camps and youth camps, and right. And so it's like, you're just never Like there's never a gap.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, like I have tremendous respect for all those guys. Right. But it's like, I mean, that lifestyle it's
a grind. Now with, when you were studying the neuromuscular therapy while doing the bodybuilding, were you able to start to kind of put one together at that time?
Yeah. So I'm starting to, so I'm in school for neuromuscular therapy, and neuromuscular therapy, like what we studied in school, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but it's like the Janet Travell and Simmons. It's like the Trigger Point books.
Is it kind of like the Kindle book?
I'm not sure.
They're like, and I wish I knew the name of the thing, but I think I know what I think I know what you're talking about. So it's all a trigger point and kind of some movement based, but not really.
Yeah. They'd have like spray and stretch and like injections. Like Janet Travell, she got famous because she worked with JFK. Right. And so JFK, when he came back from the war, he had real bad spine issues. And so she worked with him.
Yes.
Right. And so then when he became president, that's when she, was able to start to write these books with Travell and Simmons. And then I think there's someone else. And so that's what I was studying.
Now, was muscle testing associated with that?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
So I get where you're going. So
it was strictly like that schooling. That schooling was essentially like you're doing like palpation, right? You're doing, a version of physiology. And it's kind of like, because, so it's essentially like it's a massage therapy program, but so I did the massage therapy program with neuromuscular therapy, which was the added part. Okay. Cause that's what I wanted to do, was that I didn't care about the massage. I wanted to do the neuromuscular therapy.
Yeah.
Right. And I was more interested because those were people that, at the time where they would say they have musculoskeletal pain and dysfunction.
Yes.
So you're working with people that actually have problems. So then when I went to do my clinical work, I wouldn't do the actual quote unquote massage. They would give me people that had problems. Right. And that's when I figured out quite quickly that, these people have problems and I have no solution
to
their problems.
Yeah.
Right?
So how did you start to, because with those things, when I would go through things like that, I feel great on the table, right? And maybe I get the range of motion on the table, but then, a half hour later, next day, right back to the same thing, right? So, and you've closed that gap through all the other therapy. We know, why now, right? So how were you trying to integrate what you were using at that time with your own bodybuilding or people that you were training with? Because you're not going to not do it, or you know what I'm saying? Because it's right there. You're studying it. You see some dysfunction. Everybody's going to complain about something. Anybody that's training hard, there's something's going to be jacked up. So how was that early integration to be able to figure out there's something's missing here? Yeah,
to your point, right? Because like, think about it, when you're training something, right? Like you see like the positive stimulating effects, right? And most of the time, and that's an active process that's ongoing, right? So like you're doing work, right? And you're doing work, and because you're doing work, like you're gonna like stimulate some sort of adaptation, right? When a therapist, generally, like the therapy that I was initially did, like I'm doing all the work, right? And then when you start to think about just basic loading, right? So like think about yourself and think about the loads that you're exposing yourself to and the type of loading that requires, biological change. Like how am I supposed to do that to you?
Yeah.
Right. So there starts to, right. And this is where there starts to become like a huge disconnect, because I don't know, the sport of bodybuilding is interesting because you can see how the body adapts to like mechanical loading. Same with powerlifting, right? Like you can see it, and it's like a feedback loop, right? And when you start to do things that are positive or favorable, like you get rewarded for them. So to your point, like what would happen in like a therapeutic setting is work would be done, but you're always starting back at like point A. Like you're not pushing, right? So it's like people will still have the same issues.
Yes.
Right? Where it's like, think about it, like at one point, like you may have had a weak bench, and now you have a moderate bench, and now you have a strong bench. Why is it like for 20 years, you've had the same hip issue, but within those 20 years, you've been seeing all these people and like, they're all great, but they're not great because you still have the same issue. Do you see what I'm saying?
No,
right?
Yeah. That's kind of why I'm asking this, is because that led you to dig deeper.
Correct. And so at that point in time, I had yet to meet Louie. I had yet to meet George. Okay. So in my exposure was Charles Poliquin. Well, Poliquin was a big ART guy. So I remember essentially saying like, okay, well, let me go take ART, which is active release technique. So I go take ART, and, you know, I'm pretty serious about studying this. So, you know, they give you the protocol book, they give you the DVD. So, and you have to pass a test as well to get approved for this certification. So I do my first one, and I'm like, I loved it because of the demands, right? Like, you went there and you're learning like all these protocols, you're learning how to palpate, right? And then, you know, and then there's a test, right? So like, there's all these things where I'm like, yes, like this is really pushing me, right? But then at the end of the day, like, you know, and so I took all the ARTs, upper, lower, spine, nerve entrapment, complex protocols, right? And I'm still like, okay, like this still isn't like we can maybe get into kind of the specifics of it, but I'm still like, okay, like what I'm seeing, because at this point in time now I'm working in a medical practice. So like I have a lot of clients that I'm essentially seeing. So I'm working directly with a medical doctor, right? And it's like the same thing. Like, I'm not seeing like the effects that I see at the gym. I'm kind of not being able to stimulate at this other setting, right? So I'm kind of like, hey, there's something more to this. There's something more to this. And so that led me to like continuing education, because I already maxed out ART, and, you know, and then when I would go to take the test, I remember I would say like, okay, like, so I understand the protocols, but like, how do I know when I'm done? Right? Because like, okay, let's kind of play this scenario. Like, you have a high training IQ. You've trained for a really long period of time. So like, I can't bullshit you. So when you come in and you start to ask me specific questions, why? Because you're training, let's say the bench press, right? And you're going, hey, this shoulder needs to do that, like, right? I can't, like, and you start to ask me questions. If I can't answer them, like, what am I doing? Right? And so like so when I would say like, okay, so, you know, you would take your test, and then after you take your test, like if you passed, I would ask people, I'd be like, well, how do I know when I'm done with the protocol? Oh, well, you'll know. And I'm like, but I don't. Do you know what I mean? Like I wish I did. Yeah. Because and then like you could see that when I was interacting with people, and they're like, okay, yeah, like this feels good, because, you know, you're essentially like pinning and stretching to simplify it. Like, it's more than that, right? But that's really what it is. Like, shorten the tissue, take an opposing tension, lengthen the tissue, right? Like that's, you know, and there's a protocol for every muscle, and there could be multiple protocols, right? And so I still knew where I'm like, man, like work was good, right? But I'm like, man, like there's something still missing. So then, and I'm taking like other courses too. So I'm taking like Tom Meyer's course with like anatomy trains, and you go there and you're like, okay, like this is cool information, but it's not really actionable. Like once again, I'm trying to close this gap where it's like, I'm working with someone and we're both on the same page, kind of like training. Yeah. Right. Like I'm kind of like, we're kind of like training partners, and it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. And like, that didn't exist. Right. So then that led me essentially to take a course out in Vegas called FRC, Functional Range Conditioning.
All right. So before you get there, let me kind of define for people what this gap is that you're talking about. Yeah. So if we go back in that time and you're working on me, and it's, you know, me at that time would have been, you know, the ART, it doesn't hurt as much as Rolfing, but it's going to hurt. So it's got to work, right? Yeah. And so you fix everything, right? So I have the range of motion. Then I'm sitting in my car afterwards. I'm like, okay, don't fucking move, because anything that you do is going to unravel everything that's going on in there. And then you go back to the gym, and maybe you feel better. Depends how far, you know, if it's 3 days removed, maybe you don't feel better, but you go like the next day, it's like you feel better. Then the day after that, it's like, fuck, I need to go back again because it's jacked up again. That's the gap that we're talking about, because there's no progressive structure.
Yeah.
Right. Like in strength training, you need, progressive overload.
Yeah.
There's no progressive structure beyond here. We got this range of motion back. There's no structure on how do we maintain that range of motion. And there's no structure on how to strengthen you in this new range of motion, which is a whole other fucking problem that happens. If, let's say, you magically could keep that range of motion for said athlete, then they go load themselves in that new range of motion, they're fucked.
Yeah.
Because it's not strong. It's not adapted.
Yeah.
Right? Which brings you to the next, because now continue with the next coursework.
Yeah. So everything that you're saying, right? Like, so like, yeah. And I love how you frame that, because you're right. Right. Like, so why is there a different standard? Like if you're a strength coach or like, why is there a different standard when it goes into the clinic?
Yes.
I see this all the time. Like people just make stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But a strength coach can't do that. A strength coach is held to a different standard because there's that feedback. Right. Mm-hmm. But like that's missing. Right. Like I never got exposed to that when I was in school. That's why I had to keep the amount of money that I spent on continuing education is rapidly, it's totally crazy. Mm-hmm. Right. Because I essentially learned what all doesn't work. Right. First. Right. Mm-hmm. And then I had to unlearn a lot of stuff. Right. And so I continued to learn. And so I'm still searching for like continuing education, because like, I just have a simple question. Like, how do I know when I'm done? Like, how do I know like what to do with this person? Because this, I don't want this person to have to constantly see me. Mm-hmm. Right. Like we want to like actually address and resolve this issue, and it's not happening.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of people just stay in that loop. Right. And you're just kind of stagnating. And I get it could be a great business model. Right. But it's very frustrating when, someone like you or I, who can see the results that you should be getting if you know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people don't know how potent training can be, because they're just randomly doing something. And I think a lot of people don't know how potent treatment can be.
Yes.
Because it's just like, like I'll get to it, but it's just like, here's the boo-boo and we rub the boo-boo.
Yes.
And now the boob doesn't feel as bad.
Yes.
But the boo-boo is probably just a symptom of something else that you don't, right?
Yes.
And so it's kind of like, I can see and I deal with it so much. So essentially to get back on track. So then I end up finding a course. It's called Functional Range Conditioning. It's taught by Dr. Andrea Ospina. And I fly out to Vegas to take this course. And like I said, I did all the lectures prior. Mm-hmm. So there's like lectures that you get prior. So I did all the lectures. I had all my notes. And as I'm doing it, I'm like, man, this actually makes sense. And how FRC was taught was it's kind of like, there's like rehab, and then you get put right back into training. And it was like supposed to be kind of that middle ground between there.
I'm always looking for ways to improve my training, business, life, but none of that matters if my sleep is trash. If your sleep sucks, your recovery and performance is compromised. Sleep is the ultimate recovery tool, and temperature plays a massive role in this. This is where the Chili Pad comes in. It's a water-based, temperature-controlled mattress topper that fits any bed. You can set the temperature from 55 degrees to 115 degrees and even schedule changes throughout the night. It also has dual zone control, so I can stay cool while my wife stays warm. Visit www.sleepme/tabletalk to get 20% off your Chili Pad with code TABLETALK. This special offer is available for Table Talk listeners and only for a limited time. Order it today with free shipping and try it out for 30 days. You can return it for free if you don't like it with their Sleep Me trial. Visit www.sleepme/tabletalk and see why cold sleep is your ultimate ally in performance and recovery. Yes.
Right. And it's like, this is kind of the gap that we're discussing. Mm-hmm. Right. And so immediately I see that slide and I'm like, oh, okay. Like this is probably something that is going to make a lot of sense. So go through the course and I'm like, it's a 2-day course. I go through the course and I'm like, okay, this is what was missing. Right. Like I didn't go up to Dr. Spina and say anything, but I remember a couple of things. I remember going like, okay, like, it was very uncomfortable, right? Because at that point in time, like we have a very successful medical practice, right? But I know that like on my end, like I'm not like, this could be significantly better, mm-hmm. right? And I'm trying, right? Like I'm trying, but it's like, it's kind of like the answer is always in the future, right? So I remember coming back home and thinking like, well, fuck, now I got to they have a soft tissue course, which is essentially taught by Dr. Michael Shivers. And that's called FR, Functional Range Release. So immediately I'm like, listen, I'm going to sign up for this course because now I'm questioning a lot of what I'm doing, which is really uncomfortable because like I said, I'm practicing. And in the back of my mind, I'm starting to go like, listen, like, I'm applying like what I learned in FRC, right? But I'm like, listen, like there's still a gap, right? Because like I'm a manual practitioner. And so like, that's not like manual practitioners can take it, but like there's a part of it for that. So I go up to essentially Connecticut, and that's my first exposure to Dr. Shivers. And this is crazy, man. So there was like, you know how when you have like, you suspect that something is out of place, but then you get like very specific clues that like, hey, you're right. And if you're right, you have to like stop going this way and turn around and go that way.
Yes.
Okay. So like this is happening on day one because like I'm prepared. So I'm taking this course and I'm like, I'm prepared because I'm like, listen, I've spent so much money. I need to figure out.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So essentially we're going over, I'll go over the specifics. So we're going over psoas palpation, palpating the iliopsoas at the spine. Okay. And he's showing you how to layer the psoas. So the psoas is essentially, it's the muscle that's on the front side of the lumbar spine, right? For listeners that maybe don't know, right? So it's deep to like your abdominals. So think of like all your abdominals, it's deep to that, right? And how I was taught prior was like, oh, well, you just go side lying and like, you'll get right onto the psoas. Okay, well, now we're teaching, like Dr. Shivers is teaching palpation and he's saying, no, you gotta layer down. So the knee's got to be bent so that you can layer down into the tissue. And I'm going, well, I thought I've been treating the psoas for like 2 years. And then I'm starting to go, well, hold on. I just palpated the psoas. And that's not what it feels like when I've been doing psoas release. So now I'm like, okay, like this is kind of like an aha moment to the point where like, I can't even focus on anything else. I bring my wife, she's not my wife at the time, but my wife is there, cause hey, we'll have fun, Yeah. And this is day one. Right. And like, this is the very end of the day. And so I'm going, holy shit. So I remember after it's over, remember, I never say anything to Dr. Spina but I go directly up to him and I go, can I ask you a very specific question? And he goes, yeah. And I go, can I get to the psoas from a side lying position? And he goes, no, you can't. And so I'm like, fuck, okay, this is what I want to hear, but it's not really what I want to hear. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he also makes the comment like, hey, I see, he's like, I've kind of been watching you. He goes, and like, I know that you have an ART background, and kind of like alludes like, hey, like, listen, like maybe, and so it kind of just triggered. So I remember my wife and I go out to eat at this Italian restaurant. And at the time I just started working with Louie at Westside. Okay. Because this is actually, cause we worked with Stipe Miocic. Okay. So this is the timeline. So Stipe actually was fighting on that Saturday for the heavyweight title. Right. So we go to this Italian restaurant, we're eating, and my wife's like, well, how's the seminar going? And I'm sitting there thinking like, oh, like, well, how do I tell her like, hey, like it's going really well, but like, I'm gonna have to change my entire practice. You see what I'm saying? And so that was essentially that kind of like that first aha moment where then I was like, okay, I think that now I've stumbled upon some of these answers. Right. And then it just, we've kept it going, but that's kind of like, and then, I took like that was technically the lower extremity course. So then I took the upper extremity and then I took the spine. And then at that point in time in working with Dr. Shivers, I was now able to start to be like, okay, here's what I'm palpating to, this is what I'm doing. So now now in practice, like I'm starting to actually like, you almost have like a training partner, right? Because then I could start to explain to people, when people would come over and like, they just want you to like, oh, you're a neuromuscular therapist, just go ahead and rub my boo-boo, here it is. Yeah. Right. I would be like, listen, this is a capacity versus demands mismatch. We got to do something to increase your capacity to meet your demands. And now I'm able to be like, okay, like I actually have that skill set finally at probably like 26.
Now, right at that same time though, you're being exposed to Westside in a concurrent system. right? So, and you integrated those, those two things into that. So it's, I mean, there's two things coming together at the same time, right? To be able to build this even more.
Yeah, because what ended up happening was, so I'm talking to Lou, and Lou's telling me about the science and practice of strength training. Well, dude, I never got exposed to that book when I was in school. Mm-hmm. So I remember he hands me a copy, hands me Super Training. He takes me in there, he's giving me all these books. And so I'm like reading these books. And I'm like, I never learned any of this in college. I have to unlearn a lot of the stuff that I learned in college now too. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Now I'm like, dude, you got to be kidding me, right? And so, but all of that stuff enabled me to be able to make that change, if that makes sense. Like I can see where people get stuck in a rut and they're like, hey, this is what I went to school for, and they don't evolve, right? They're not a student, right? Whereas, it kind of showed me that like, listen, like this industry that we're in is evolving. Like it's a living thing, right? And if you're not evolving with it, like you're going to get left behind.
Yes.
Right.
But the way that I'm kind of seeing this unfold for you is, in the therapy standpoint, you're dealing with static or at best maybe linear models, to be able to progress. And that's why nobody ever really gets better, right? Maybe they're out of pain for a few days, but they really never get better. And so that's loosely internal systems that are not having any type of progressive overload beyond stage A. Now on this other side with the concurrent system, you have external overloads that are concurrently changing, right? Mm-hmm. So you were able to take the ability to be able to say, hey, here's how this concurrent system works. Mm-hmm. How can we apply that to the internal system, so it's not, so there's different ways, because the gap, if I'm to reiterate it again, is that there's a difference between maximal strength and absolute strength, right? And the absolute strength will probably never display, right? Because it's like in a lab, and it's the freak that lifts the car off the person, whatever it's going to be. And the high performance athlete is going to have a smaller gap between that maximal and absolute. That's the whole goal, right? Is to be able to close that gap. But when you close that gap, you're also running the risk of the better that all gets, the external system, muscular system, let's make it kind of easy, it's going to adapt to the demands that you're trying to develop. In powerlifting, it's simple. There's 3 movement patterns. There's 3 lifts. And as those get better, other things are going to maybe not regress, but not progress, at the same rate as what those things are. So thus something breaks. And then they go find, MAT, massage therapy, whatever the host of the shit is that they're doing to be able to do that. And maybe it gets them out of pain, but it doesn't bring it up to equalize where that strength is, right? This is what I was saying from the very beginning is if you can avoid the injury, then you can progress and train harder for longer. But it has to be integrated, in with that whole system where what you've been able to do is to create, I don't want to say exercises, because any exercise could be used. The exercise is going to be dependent upon what the problem is. That ability to scale that up. So take it from being non-functional to functional baseline. And that's where at best most people will go. But if I understand correctly, that has to go up as that maximal strength goes up, or maximal load on tissues. Because if it's alignment, it's going to be different load on tissues, right? Because there's more shit going on. Is that a fair way to kind of explain?
Yeah. And I think here's a easier way to understand it as well, right? So everything you're saying is 100% correct, right? How I try to articulate it to athletes, right? Because like I'm working with the lifters at Westside, I'm working with linemen, I'm working with guys that have a high training IQ, right? That's why I'm saying, like, for other people that don't work in that environment, you can probably just make stuff up. But like, I'm working with NFL guys that have had exposure to all sorts of different people. Like they know when there's bullshit. Like they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources, a lot of people are trying to work with them, right? So like they know, like people think that People think that these guys aren't intelligent. It's like the same thing. Some of the lifters at Westside that I work with, like these guys are incredibly intelligent, right? Like these guys understand training at a level that you'll never read about in a book, right? Okay, so this is kind of what I saw at Westside, okay? Because so when I get to Westside and Louie gives me all these books and stuff and I'm reading them, and then every week I'm treating Lou. So like I have that feedback loop too, right? Where like he's closing a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
Right. And listen, like he's got a very unique way of teaching to where like you remember it.
Yeah. Well,
right?
He's also different because he's got an extremely high pain tolerance.
Yeah.
You know, so your feedback is like nil.
Yeah, for sure. And so this is what was interesting. So when you're talking about like absolute strength and maximal strength, right? That's kind of when we look at strength from the inside out instead of the outside in, because historically that's how it's from my, I'm just going to talk about my opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Like if you look at individuals or like, if you look at the Soviet Union, if you look at what you guys did at Westside Barbell, like these are paradigm shifting pushes. Like the Soviets were the first ones that was like, hey, let's like put a method behind this. Then at Westside, it's like, hey, there's this system that's starting to emerge, right? Now we kind of change the nomenclature and say, hey, it's a strategy, not necessarily a system, but so what ends up happening is like, you know, and this is the beauty of it from my perspective, right? Because I had to unlearn a lot of stuff, like in regards to, let's say, programming. Okay, because that's kind of where like, you know, the shit really hits the fan. You don't have a lot of debates in physiology, but you know, when it starts to get into programming, that's where, you know, programming it's crazy.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Soviets, right, like they essentially establish, you know, 3 or 4 methods: your max effort method, your dynamic effort method, your repeated effort method, and it's either to failure or not to failure. So it depends on, you know, you can say it's 3 method, but you know, if you do repeated efforts, it's either to failure or not failure. So it could be 3 or 4.
I would say 4, right?
Yeah.
Because they're different stimulus.
Yeah, I say it's 4 too.
Yeah, yeah.
100%. Okay.
Yeah.
So you got those 4 methods. Right. And so what happens is, you know, when I was reading the Science and Practice of Strength Training, and that's why, you know, Louie would always tell me, you know, he would always use Zatsiorsky's quote about the nervous system only adapts to the load placed upon it. Well, when you read what they were saying, when I read it, how I interpreted it was max effort was primarily a neurological based thing. And so was dynamic effort method. Right. And then repeated efforts was, hey, do repeated efforts for the tissue, and then it'll scale up the tissue, but the tissue was red muscle tissue. Okay. So essentially
muscle tissue. So muscle tissue compared to neurological and tendon.
Yeah. So yeah. And what we do, we have like what's called the internal strength model. So we have different ecologies. So you have the nervous system, which is something that you can specifically train. You have the connective tissue, which is just the white tissue that allows for force transmission to occur. Right. And then we also have red muscle tissue. Right. And so when you start, so this is what I was seeing at Westside, right? Is you guys figured out, you guys were so good at scaling up the nervous system that I was seeing shit on my end blow up.
You know what works? Consistency, hard training, and the right fuel. My friend, John Meadows, built Granite with that exact mindset. He didn't believe in gimmicks, he believed in products that deliver. 2 of my daily staples are creatine and Meadows Whey. The creatine helps me recover and stay focused, while the protein helps me meet my daily requirements. I will mix my protein in with my morning coffee and add it to my oatmeal. While training, I'll also toss in creatine with whatever I'm drinking. Creatine and whey are the same staples that John used, and I recommend them to anyone serious about their training. Supporting Granite isn't just about supplements, it's about continuing John's vision and legacy in this industry. Visit granitenutrition.com and use the code TABLETALK for 10% off your order. Train hard and support the legacy.
Yes, yes.
Which you're not going to see in everyday life.
Yes.
Most people, they're not like if you throw max effort, like you're probably a really good, you probably have more than I do, right? Experience where you start to say max effort and they go, oh no, like we can't do max effort. Okay. So really what you're saying is nobody's really training, as the Soviets would say, they're not using the superior method to scale up the neurology.
Yes.
So they're not seeing the potential of the human nervous system. At Westside, that thing's getting scaled, right? And then it's like, okay. And then when you look at dynamic effort method, well, now it's like, okay, well, now get that neurology to output at a faster speed. So now it's like all these speed barriers that, George Halbert kind of taught me about. Now it's like where for listeners, it's like, hey, if you're on a bench press and you get to that sticking point or that mini max, right? One of the things that dynamic effort method does is it gets you to get there faster so that you blow through it.
Yes.
It's just a very simple, there's a lot of other stuff. I don't want to simplify.
No, it's a simple way to explain it. The way that I've always explained it was if I was to hold a one board, 5 inches off your chest and the barbell's on your chest, and then you push into it slow, with a slow speed, I can probably resist it. You're going to hit the board and you're not going to be able to do anything. Now, if you smash that as hard as you possibly can, right, that board's going to move, right? Maybe it won't move all the way to a lockout, but if that's where your sticking point was and you got it to move a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, well, you just went through where your mini max was, and then you're able to lock that out. That's that compensatory acceleration.
Yes.
Right? And it's a neural thing too, because you have to learn that. For a lot of, now we go back to your background, right? So coming through explosive sports, football and stuff like that, you kind of know it's easier to make that connection. Some people, it's a little bit harder because they're going to fall on the spectrum. I was always faster than I was strong. Right? There are other people that were stronger than they were fast, but that doesn't negate the fact that both have to be accounted for. Right? Where if I just didn't do any of the explosive work to keep that, because the argument against that, which I'm sure you've heard, is you can't get any faster past a certain age. And I'll concede that, right? I don't believe it, but I'll concede that and say, yeah, but you can get slower.
Yeah.
Right. So but if you can just maintain that, because that explosive component's one of the first ones to go when you age.
Right.
So if you can maintain that, then you're one step ahead.
Yes.
Right. So concede that point, here you go. Now with that, so as you're having all those things kind of come in with that, the dicey area becomes the repeated effort.
Yeah.
Right. And I like that you divided it in two. Because the repeated effort to failure to repeated effort 5 RIR, is going to be different, especially if you're dealing with a therapy type of thing to where a repeated effort could be a set of 100 repetitions.
Correct.
And that's a whole different modality than a set of 6, and you can't do the 7th.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So they're vastly different, where when it gets kind of like all grouped into one, it becomes a clusterfuck.
Correct. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's why I always say it's 4, right?
Yeah,
but then you get some people that are like, well, in the 1990s, they wrote about it being 3, right? And it's like, yeah, but, 95, they wrote about it in Science and Practice Strength Training being 4.
Yes.
Right. So it's like things change. Like it's kind of these people hold on to these older paradigms where it's like, yeah, that was right. But now like things are changing, right? Like, and there's a lot of nuance to all this stuff.
So when you're seeing these guys that have those abilities, then you're also seeing what the gap of having a higher level of those abilities than any other athlete's really going to have.
Well, yeah, think about it. So like, it's kind of hard, right? Because like you get numb to these guys being this crazy, like strong, and even females. Like when I was there, like some of these females, like the stuff that they were doing, like it blows your mind, right? But then you kind of start to become numb to it. Whereas like I realized when I started to travel that like people didn't have that. Like they didn't really know what the human nervous system, like how you could scale it up, right? Right. And so if you look at like the max effort method and the dynamic effort method, right, you can see that those from Dr. Dr. Zatziorsi's point, they're primarily neurologically based. Okay. Which means that the biology, so let's divide it up into neurology and biology.
Yes.
Right. And then we'll just kind of layer on the biological law of specificity and say that like, you're either going to primarily train one or the other. Okay. So like, and if you look at the intent of training, and this is kind of one thing that you were alluding to earlier, right? Is intent. Like, what's the reason why you're doing what you're doing? Yes. Intent plays a huge role, and people just kind of act like everybody's got the same intent. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But But essentially, like what I was seeing on my end, right? Because think about it, I was seeing lifters that, you know, they were running into, they had limiting constraints. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the limiting constraint wasn't neurological. It was all biological.
Yes.
Okay. So like, so then I'm starting to get this feedback, right? And that's what I started to see with kind of like all the lifters at Westside that I was seeing, right? Like all these individuals, like their neurology is scaling up in essentially like a non-ecological way, right? Where it's like the neurology is just going and going and going. Okay. But what about like when the nervous system, you know, just a simple chain of logic is like the nervous system top down is going to recruit the red muscle tissue, and the red muscle tissue is going to generate a force that the white tissue is going to have to transmit.
Yes.
But what happens when you're not training the white connective tissue?
Well, yeah, we know what happens.
Okay. But here's the interesting thing. This is the interesting thing. I think that this is my interpretation of it from talking to a lot of different people. I don't think that people give Westside Barbell and like the lifters that were there the credit that they deserve. And it actually really does irritate me, right? Because they actually had they figured out that solution,
mm-hmm.
right? So what ended up happening, in my opinion, right, is geared lifting came in.
Mm-hmm. In
gear lifting, if you look at it from the lens of the nervous system doesn't know that like when you put gear on, it doesn't know that it's behaving as external connective tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just keep it simple. The gear, and that's why the nervous system can still continue to push. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so when everybody goes, well, why did Louie Simmons accept geared lifting? Because he wanted to see the potential of the human nervous system. If you talk to him, he was trying to actualize that,
mm-hmm.
right? And these biological constraints. And so what happened? Now you see all the gear coming in, right? Okay, well, guess what? If you're going to use that kind of system of training and you're a lineman, you don't get to use gear. And I work with linemen. So now I have a completely different problem set.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem set isn't scaling up connective tissue. It's now like, well, what's going on with the joint? What's going on with the connective tissue? Right. And if you technically retrospectively look back at like a lot of the guys that I've worked with, like that was always the issue. You know, Lou had a shoulder joint replacement, patella rupture. What is that? Okay, well, those ecologies they would be considered biological.
Mm-hmm.
So you have it in the joint and now you have it in the connective tissue. And then I would say, well, when are you training the joint? Well, we're not. Well, when are you training the connective tissue? Well, we're only doing the connective tissue on the triceps. Well, why? They don't have to,
mm-hmm.
because they have gear. So like they're technically smarter, in my opinion, right? This is the frustration that I get because I'm like, listen, like these lifters are incredibly smart. Like I talk to them, I interact with them, like we're solving problems together. You see what I'm saying? And they go, oh, well, this system doesn't. It's like, well, first off, it kind of really irritates me because, you know, obviously I'm tied to a lot of these people personally. So they're my friends, right? So like I also have that as well, right? And I believe that the credit, like when you look at the evolution of strength and strength training, like there's certain people that you have to give credit to,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think that what ended up happening was everybody kind of went to Westside, they maybe lingered around, okay, we'll put some bands over barbells, we'll do some dynamic effort stuff. And they didn't understand. They didn't understand kind of the potential of the nervous system. And when you're training at that level of like we understood it in regards to training linemen, because we had the issue where we got high school linemen, we had to put strength standards.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't let them get this strong because their neurology is going to blow up their biology,
mm-hmm.
because they're playing a different sport. Like football, offensive lineman is different than a powerlifter,
mm-hmm.
right? Like you're saying a powerlifter has three planes of motion. A lineman has to generate a very special strength that's going to be completely dynamic. So they're going to need a hip. They're going to need connective. They need all this extra stuff that you just can't put gear on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the beauty. So like from my perspective of kind of studying like what happened, like what you guys were doing back in the 90s,
mm-hmm.
right? Where it's like you guys are at the edge. You guys are just pushing and pushing and pushing. And yeah, shit's blowing up, but then you guys figured it out. What was it? Gear. And so you kind of, and now all these, right? But other sports are essentially, in my opinion, once again, they're taking these methods and they don't know how to constrain them, let's say.
Yes.
And the neurology starts to really outpace. Why? Because maybe they have no experience. Maybe they haven't done the training themselves and they don't know how potent that system is
mm-hmm.
for scaling up the neurology. But that system is for a specific sport.
Yes.
So you're discussing context. That sport's powerlifting. So in the sport of powerlifting, it's really good. But what happens when you take some of the stuff and you don't really understand it, and you start to take that stuff and you implement it in the NFL? Well, maybe now you're creating a bunch of connective tissue injuries. Maybe now you're creating a bunch of joint injuries.
Yes. Well, even if we stay with the sport of powerlifting, even with the gear, if the bar decides to go sideways on a geared bench and the shoulder integrity isn't able to control that force of when it's out of that position, how? Yep. There it goes, right? So, or the same thing with the squat, if it goes, probably less so than with the upper body, but you're going to see more with the upper body issues because there's more bar path variances with the shoulder that can happen than with the lower body. But interestingly enough, when I look at that comparison, the gear is essentially providing the protection that the internal system should be protecting.
Yeah.
Right. So it allows that nervous system to scale back up. But if it's raw powerlifting and then that's taken off, you're still going to look at this deficit as they get stronger and stronger and stronger of what that internal to the external is. Mm-hmm. Right. On the extreme, you're talking about, the linemen and so forth and this constraints, mm-hmm. which how'd that go over with Lou? Because, because they are there. Right. Because on the other end of that whole thing, if it's a high school lineman, I'd guess maybe 450, 500 pounds might be where the constraint would be. Maybe they could push it to 700, but to be able to do that, how much time, effort, focus is going to have to go there? Meanwhile, they may still not even know their plays. Or they may not be able to move laterally. So now it's being done in exchange. So a quality is being strengthened beyond the capacity that's actually required, where the other capacities are being not brought up to speed mm-hmm. or regressing, mm-hmm. Because of all that. But then every sport will have different restraints with all that. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of coaches will understand that, but they won't know where to go. Mm-hmm. with that. It's like, okay, look, this kid squats enough. I guess we'll just have them sprint more. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of where it falls.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you're 100% correct. Right. And, with lineman special strength, that's kind of like, it's kind of started off as like a fun project and then rapidly kind of turned into a business. And that's with Olin Kreutz, who mm-hmm. played in the NFL for 14, 15 years. Right. Like I won't speak for him, but like his career is, you just mm-hmm. got to put tape on. Right. And it's funny, like to what you're saying is it's like, he was kind of like in the position I am in where like, there's things missing. Right. There's more to like being a power lifter than just like, let's say a box squat. Mm-hmm. Right. Like what you're saying, like there's other qualities, like you need a hip. You got to be able to get into a stance, mm-hmm. right? So that's why like these other, let's say systems or strategies started to emerge was because there was more than just, the bar pass in powerlifting, mm-hmm. right? And so yeah, I mean, and what ended up happening too, and this may be an interesting concept to discuss. So, the biological law of accommodation.
Explain it to me. I know, but explain it for the audience.
Yeah. So we'll try to keep it as simple as possible, right? But it essentially means that like you have biological, so we'll do it from a joint perspective. Mm-hmm. So a joint is a biological thing. You have the articulation of two bones. Those bones are encapsulated by white connective tissue called a capsule. And what happens is if all you're doing is like a linear motion, like a bench press, that capsule will start to accommodate to be able to that bench press, those lines of tissue in the bench press, which then is going to limit rotation. Mm-hmm. Does this make sense?
Especially the higher it gets, the more accommodation that there is, the stronger their bench.
Yes. Yes. Right. Okay. So what started happening was, I would work on, as I started to educate myself on like what these guys are doing, I started to do the training myself with George Halbert. Right. And so like, I knew kind of what these guys were going through and girls. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, it was funny when I would do like joint assessments on them, I would see that their lift is going up. So like, let's say your bench press was 300 and now it's 315. So I'd ask them, I go, well, how's your training going? And they go, well, you're on your max effort days is your, if it's a shoulder, is your bench going up? Yeah. Bench started off, at 300, then went 305 and then went to 310. Now I'm deloading. Okay, perfect. So the bench is going up. And then I would assess the shoulder joint space. The shoulder joint space is going down. So I go, okay, external load is going up, but the internal capacity to move that load is going down. So now there's less tissue to transmit the force. The nervous system's constrained too, because now it's losing access to red tissue that it can use to produce force, right? And I'm like, this is the definition of an injury. Like if I put external load is going, everybody likes load management now, right? Load is going up, internal capacity is going down. Like that's just that. That's all you have to understand. Like that's not a good scenario to be in.
Yes. It's just a matter of time.
Correct. And so that's when I was like, oh shit, like I have to be making sure that these guys aren't losing joint range of motion. So now we actually have a trainable quality or treatable quality.
Yes.
When we're talking about rubbing tissue, hey, when do I know that I'm done? Well, does it feel better? Yeah, you're done then. You're good. Like, did you hear the actuator? Did you hear the click? Yeah, you're good.
Well, it's also the strengthening that range of motion too. Right. Yeah. That's where the deficit is with a lot of the therapeutic modalities is you can get the range of motion back. Right.
Yes.
But the range of motion, when you get it back, is going to be weak as piss. Okay. So then what has to be implemented in there to be able to strengthen that risky range of motion?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is a phenomenal concept. Okay. Because what you're saying is when the joint acquires a range of motion that it didn't have before. So you have,
or had before and lost.
Yeah. So let's say you had 30 degrees of shoulder joint internal rotation. We go to assess it. You have 15. Then we go ahead and treat it. And now you have 30. What you're saying is, but the tissue from 15 to 30 has not been exposed to any loading. Correct.
It hasn't had the accommodation of the other tissues, right? This is where you come in. Like this is the gap that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because think about it. And then let's overlay it. Well, you have an athlete that's really pushing the boundaries of what they can do. So like, are they going to do max effort training? Yeah, they are. Okay. So that tissue that hasn't been exposed to any loading is now going to have to take a training max. Okay. So you have to start to ask yourself, okay, am I putting this athlete at a higher risk of injury? Yes. Because that tissue has no exposure to loading. Okay. So how do you go about acquiring that range of motion? So how you go about acquiring that. So now we're talking about a joint. So we're talking about a biological element that's trainable and treatable. Okay. And this may be something that is worth going over before we kind of walk through this, right? Is in biology, there's a guy named Stuart Kaufman. He wrote a book. He's like a complexity scientist. Okay. And he wrote a book. It's called A World Beyond Physics. Okay. And he discusses work. Right. He uses Peter Atkins' definition of what work is. It's the constrained release of energy into a few degrees of freedom. Okay. So just the constrained release of energy into a few degrees of freedom. Okay. And so we're talking about the few degrees of freedom where like that 15. So the athlete is at 15. We want to get them to 30. Right. So we have to release energy into that to get it. Okay. So another thing that he goes through is propagating work and non-propagating work. And I know that this is getting into the weeds, but it's really important. So propagating work means that you have a specific goal and the work that you did propagates you to that goal. Okay. Because you would agree that you can do work that doesn't get you to your goal. Which is what a lot of training is in treatment. Unfortunately, it's non-propagating work. That's why I kind of want to, so the easy example I give when we teach seminars is I go, listen, I want to make my wife happy, right? My wife wanted a TV in the garage, but she wanted the TV that was in one of the spare bedrooms into the garage. So I took the TV from the spare bedroom and I put it in the garage and she didn't like it there. So then I brought it back up. I did a lot of work and I didn't make her happy. That's non-propagating work. You with me?
Yep.
Okay. So essentially, to get back to this, we want to do propagating work where we can't just, this is where I like where you're going with this, right? Because you're thinking concurrently, right? Where it's like, it's not good enough just to get the range of motion. You also have to load the tissue. Okay. So how are we going to actually acquire that 15 degrees of motion from in internal rotation? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to that first barrier. So we take them into internal rotation. This is the barrier. That barrier could be, it's going to be neurological and biological. So the nervous system is going to have what we call neurological tightness.
It's protecting it.
Correct.
Yes.
Where like the spindles are essentially kicking you out. So when you get to end range, you're going to feel a bounciness, and you're not going to feel like a stretch, like into a band. Like Dr. Shivers gives a great example where he takes a resistance band and he puts a ball into it, and you can see that stretch, you can feel that stretch. That's what the end range should be. That should be that capsular stretch. When you get there and it's bouncy, that's the nervous system saying, no, I'm not going to let you in here for whatever reasons. We won't get into it, right? But what that tells us, if we're training, what that tells us is that tissue is not getting exposed to loading. Okay. And it also tells us that if you had 30 at one point, now you have 15, we're seeing a retraction. So we're seeing biological accommodation at the joint level.
Yeah.
Because that's a biological thing that's accommodating now. And we have objective data because I'm doing the passive. So it's like, see how this is getting, so your bench is going up, see how this is getting worse? So this is a real problem, right? Okay, so that's kind of the beauty of it. So Dr. Spina essentially came up with something that's called a PAILS. It's called progressive angular isometric loading. Okay. And so it's an isometric. Okay. And what happens is when you get to that end range, you know how people would do PNF? Okay. And the intent of PNF is just kind of like get a little bit more range.
Yeah.
There's no, people would agree, there's no intent to like strengthen, like think about like when somebody told you, oh, hey, Dave, we're going to use PNF to make your hip flexor stronger. Nobody said that, right?
No.
So the intent of PNF is not to create any type of strengthening, I'm just using terms very broadly, strengthening stimulus. It's kind of like, hey, you don't have this range of motion, we'll just open it up. And then that creates the issue that you're discussing.
Yes. Well, my question there, since you're on that, is if it's a loaded PNF. Okay. Right? So say one arm tricep extension.
Yes.
Sets your pump sets already over.
Yeah.
You're here, and that's where the end range is. Then 1, 2, 3. Then you get more range. 1, 2, 3, more range. 1, 2, 3, more. Then you do a loaded stretch for X period of time with the tension on there. Where I would see that as more of a practical solution than you pushing against my elbow and then just doing the PNF, getting the range of motion, and say that's good. And that's where most people will do. It's just that.
Correct.
To where the example that I gave would play into a little bit of not so much, the isometric. Yeah, because it's in that position. Yeah, because think about your background. You're thinking about strengthening that tissue. Yes. So you're getting like the benefit of the nervous system behaving in that specific range and the information that's created from that work being good, and the nervous system giving you more range of motion to explore. Yes. Okay. But you're you're technically doing an isometric. You're not doing PNF. Yeah. Well, the PNF to get into that range. Okay. Okay. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. To get that, because otherwise I wouldn't get into that. Maybe I could if I held it longer. Yeah. Yeah. So. Okay. So, yeah. So what the PNF does, okay, because I think we're going to get caught up in nomenclature. So let's try to like walk this through, right? And let's walk it through with intent, right? Because you're doing work and you're doing work with an intent. So you want to increase range of motion, but at the same time you're increasing range of motion, you want to also essentially load let's say just the tissue to create a training effect in the tissue. Yes. Okay. Yes. That's no longer PNF. That's going to be an isometric contraction, and that's technically now a PAILS. Yes, okay. Which would be a progressive angular isometric loading. And so let's walk that through. So when you do a PAILS, the tissue is at length. So a PAILS stands for progressive, meaning if you look at tissue, it's at its length. So you're describing this example, this tissue is at length. Yes. So the tricep tissue is progressed to its length, and now you're going to do a 3-second isometric, and that isometric is going to strengthen that tissue because it's loaded. And then when you relax,
because it was a good impulse, because that created good information flow into the nervous system, you get more range of motion.
Yes.
Right. So essentially, you're using nomenclature of PNF when technically that's an isometric.
Yes.
Right. Because your background's kind of the same as mine.
Yeah.
So you can start to see how when I started to learn, like, well, we should just be doing isometrics at end range and not technically PNF. And then we can actually ramp up those isometrics at end range to max effort. Okay.
And how would that look?
Okay. So okay.
Because this is where I get fascinated, right? Because we're taking these modalities now and the way I would define it, and now we're putting conjugate shit into it, right? Because now we want to train it with max effort. We want to train it with dynamic effort. We want to train it with repeated effort.
Yeah, of course.
That way we're covering all bases.
Yes.
Where in my example, I'm training it just with isometric, which I guess is could kind of be max effort, not really, but depends.
Yeah.
Depends on time and load.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, 100%. Okay. Because like we have a very similar background, right? Because if you would have learned about a PALS before you learned about PNF, you'd be talking about a PALS.
Yes, this is true, but the other fact of that's true, and this is why I wanted to have you on, this would have given me 4 or 5 more years in the sport before I was shot.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Which would have allowed higher output, Yep. And this is why this is important, right? Because you don't want to get to the point where shit's so fucked up that you can't go forward.
Yeah.
Because of all that, where this is simple shit to implement.
Yeah, because this is what you're saying, right? Like this is how I'm hearing.
But I will say PALS moving forward.
Yeah. Well, think about this. Like you're in a unique position. So let's kind of walk through that. Yeah. Like you understand how potent a training stimulus can be, and you took that to the very end, and you ran into biological constraints, right? And so like you had joint issues and you had connective tissue issues, but your nervous system could still stale. So what you're trying to communicate is like, listen, I had 3 or 4 more years. My nervous system didn't actually actualize because I'm dealing with all these other bullshit things where I can't get a true training max. I gotta rotate through all these different exercises to see what it is I can do.
Yes.
Instead, right? And so that's something that I think the reason why that's worth talking about is because most people, from the people that I've worked with, don't have that experience that like that's only people that essentially understand how to use max effort and dynamic. Like those are the only people. And that's why I get frustrated because listen, I don't mind pushback, right? I welcome pushback. Okay. But like you haven't been in my shoes and you haven't worked directly with these guys. So when I get other therapists, oh, well, max effort should be in the clinic. This is crazy. It's absolutely crazy to me. Right. Like I think these and so I think it's worth going over that because essentially what you're saying is you could have had 4 or 5 more years. And this is true for name the NFL athlete. Yes. This is what we've been discussing. Hey, if we can get these guys 4 or 5 more years, then what's going to happen? Their paychecks are going to get bigger. Maybe they don't have to have a joint replacement.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I think because a lot of people they've stalled out before. Like you didn't stall out because your training was shit. You stalled out because your biology wouldn't let your constrained your neurology. Yeah. And that's what's frustrating. Right. Like
that's what's frustrating when I'm speaking to other people.
Correct.
Right. Because they can avoid that.
Yeah.
Maybe Father Time's still going to win, but they can push it down the line further.
Correct. And instead of having a total joint replacement, maybe you just have less range of motion.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're just paying a lesser toll, right? We're, like what we're doing. When I say we, it's like someone like you, someone like me. Like we're pushing extremes, right? Like that's just. I mean, we're gonna do stuff that other people on the outside. You get hooked up in the training, and you're pushing the training, and you're seeing results, right? You kind of get caught up in that feedback loop, right? And then it's not till something biological blows up that you go, oh fuck, I should have. Yeah. Right. That's normally the first feedback I got. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I tore this tissue and then it's like, oh, okay, well now I know that when I'm training my pec that's what tearing feels like. Like I just associated that with like, that's discomfort that I have to train through, and I didn't know, and now I know. And so like this is conversation.
Yeah.
So anytime, because I work with so many guys from Westside or individuals that use that system, right? That I always tell them, I go, hey, remember what that felt like when you got that like grade 1? Yeah, like listen, that's different. That's a different sensation you felt, right? Because like then a muscle burning or fatigue.
Yeah.
Right. But you don't know that until you've unfortunately, right? And you can essentially delineate. So essentially, to kind of get back to that, if you want to walk through that shoulder example, right? So essentially what we're saying is, right, like, okay, so and a lot of this comes back to intent. So like your intent is going to be, it's going to be concurrent. Okay. And what I mean by that is you're like, listen, because of your training background, you're like, the weights that I'm using, I can't just increase joint range of motion, because the bench example that you just gave me, if I get 15 more degrees in this, I have no idea how to fucking use it in a bench press. And like that tissue is going to for sure get exposed to loading.
Yes.
That's significantly higher and it's dynamic.
Yes.
Okay. So like, right, like this, like you know,
that's not good.
But you know that based off your feedback loop of training, right? Okay. So essentially, when we get to the end range of motion, so you know how you tell me, you're like, John, when I'm in the tricep and I go to push up and then I relax, it goes down a little bit more. Well, yeah, there's load, but that's also your nervous system essentially decreasing tightness, what we call tightness. So tightness is like a behavior of the nervous system. Remember when I said that like when you get something to end range, you're either going to feel like a white connective tissue capsular barrier or like this bouncy barrier. You're removing the bouncy barrier to get down to that white barrier.
Yeah.
You tracking? Okay. So then essentially what we're saying is, once we get to that white barrier, that's when we have to now start to install max loading. And here's why. Okay. And Louie's the one working on Louie. This is what really opened up my eyes. I'll have to search for it on my phone, but I remember because I also had like a buy-in thing. Right. Where it's like, you know, I'm working with guys like you, right? Yeah. And it's like, come on, dude, like, I'm not here to waste my time. Like what are we doing here? Right. And so I just remember thinking like, well, they're doing max effort loading. That's neurological in nature. I have a neurological boundary, which is the first boundary that we're talking with. Why don't I just use their nervous system and leverage that to open up this joint range of motion? And then once I'm in there, start to just do like almost repeated efforts, isometrics into that tissue to start to now stimulate that tissue adaptation.
I assume you're looking for ways to maximize your training. I'm Dave Tate from EliteFTS.com. I started Elite FTS in 1998 because there was a lack of training information online. 20 years later, we continue with that because we have over information of content online. So at Elite FTS, we filter that information down to be able to provide you with the best information you need as a strength athlete, coach, recreational lifter, or washed up meathead. Content's changed over the years. So we used to have tons of blogs, tons of articles and such. Now we have the Table Talk podcast, we have articles, we have ebooks, and we have webinars and all kinds of other information on the site. So head over to EliteFTS.com, click on the education tab, and you're going to find more articles than you know what to do with, but use the search queue and you'll find what you need.
Okay. And so I remember, you know, I don't know if anyone else has done more max effort training than Louie at this point in time, because he was like in his like 60s, like late 60s. So you're talking about, let's say conservatively 30 years of taking training maxes. Right. And so we're working on
very conservative. Yeah.
So what ends up happening is we're working on hip, and I'm working on hip internal rotation, and I'm just kind of coaching him. So I got his hip locked into that first range, and I'm going, okay, give me like 30% effort. Okay. Like, and I'm kind of coaching him through what that capsule tissue feels like. Hey, can you feel like rotational tissue? And it's going to go in this direction. Okay. That's your anterior hip capsule. Can you give me like 60% effort? Yeah. Okay. And then you see it ramp up. Okay. Can you take that up to like 80, 90? Okay. Now just hold. I'm going to try to rotate you. Just don't let me rotate. And now we have a max effort isometric going on in the clinic.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you have somebody, and this is a key point, when you have somebody like yourself who has a scaled up nervous system, I can now leverage that to rapidly start to now scale up this tissue. Okay.
Because they know the 40%, 60%, 80%, and 100%.
Yeah. So now I can keep them in this 40 to 60 zone and start to get them to maybe stress stiffen that connective tissue. Hey, hold, right? If I hold it, there's new literature that Dr. Shivers exposed me to in regards to isometrics, because we're looking at isometrics from the inside out. So if I do a holding isometric, which is called a HEMA, holding isometric muscle action, that's going to skew the force into the white connective tissue. And remember overcoming and yielding?
Yeah. So I was going to say, are you speaking about yielding?
Yeah. So
yes,
a yielding is the same thing as a HEMA. Just in the literature, they say, because the coaching cue is to hold.
Yes.
So if I'm working on your hip, I'm going to say, hey, can you feel that tissue at length? And you're going to say, yeah. And I'm going to say, well, I'm going to try to move this hip, and you're going to feel length, and I just want you to hold into that tissue.
Yeah.
Well, now think about all of the force. Everything is funneling into that tissue. You with me? And now we're stimulating that tissue. So now we're actually creating what used to be a training effect, but now we're in a clinical setting and we're doing it into this tissue. And now I can do it repeatedly, right? So think about basic repeated efforts. So now I've used the nervous system to open up this range of motion. So now the nervous system is essentially saying, listen, we maxed out in this range. This was great. It was isometric. You ramped it up as much as you can. And then that nervous system, because of how sensitive it is to training, right? This is something I figured out with injuries, right? How sensitive the nervous system is to range of motion and how it's essentially a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
So because it did a max effort, right? We essentially worked through that max effort. Now I have this 15 degrees, let's say, right? And now I can start to do repeated efforts into this. Okay. And now I'm doing repeated efforts. And now guess what I give you to go do at home? Hey, do the repeated efforts at home.
Yes.
Okay. Do me a favor. Try not to take any training maxes. So you can lower your training maxes. Okay. Until, and this may be 1 or 2 weeks, right? Because we want to still assess this tissue and make sure that this joint is also functional, which is another kind of another conversation, right? So we want to make sure it's functional, but we also want to give this tissue enough time. Well, the interesting part, you'll probably like this. So one of the things that one of my colleagues and I did was, Dr. Shivers, is I dealt with so many connective tissue injuries, right? And people were like, well, how do I load this tissue? To your point. So we've opened up joint range of motion. Now I've informed you, you have a high training IQ. So now you understand, hey, Dave, you have 15 degrees more in your hip. So listen, you know your training more than I know your training, right? So I'm going to defer to you. If I were you, I wouldn't try to hit any new PRs, but see how this thing feels on your max effort day. See how it feels. Learn how to control those new ranges of motion, right? Don't hit a PR yet. Right? Still, but we still want to tap into that nervous system.
Yes.
Okay. Right. And then same thing, dynamic effort is going to be, believe it or not, it's less because the load is submaximal. Right. And then what we're doing on the back end is you remember the ball, you would know, right? A lot of times I have to explain context, which maybe, we should do, right? Is the Bulgarians. Right. So one of the things that the Bulgarians taught us was you can train at a stimulating intensity multiple times a day. Now we wouldn't do it for the nervous system, right? Obviously, Westside, Louie, all you guys figured out that listen, this is kind of the optimal, training it multiple times a day.
Yeah.
But connective tissue is different. It's biological tissue.
Yeah. Well, the load is different. Yeah. So if it's a squat, you're going to do 3 times a day. You're dealing with a workload that's through the roof.
Correct.
Where if it's, isometric, what you're talking about, you're dealing with minimal load, but still high intent.
Correct. So now what we can do, right? The literature on training connective tissue says that essentially you can stimulate the tissue for about 10 minutes. right? And then the cells go into this refractory period for about 6 hours. This is Dr. Keith Barr's literature. Like obviously this is my interpretation of it. So if you want his, check him out. Like he's phenomenal. But essentially they're saying that like after 6 hours, those cells come out of that refractory period and then you can train it again. So I started to see like the parallels of like, hey, you know, like we could use like a Bulgarian like strategy where if your limiting constraint is connective tissue, right? You can start to actually train that, you know, maybe 2 to 3 times per day at a sub-max effort isometrically where there's no joint shearing, there's no tissue glide. And now to your point, now think about that, you know, like we do a lot of return to performance, you know, so you'll get a guy that's got, you know, a grade 2 adductor NHL guy, right? Grade 2 adductor longus tendon, musculotendinous. So like and so like you have to scale that tissue back up. We're getting MRIs too to kind of see where they're at. Well, think about it this way. Like if you're in a conventional rehabilitation setting, let's say, maybe you're not even isometrically loading that tissue. Maybe you're doing other modalities to make it feel better, right? But you're not technically loading it. But think about it. If you do that for 3 weeks and you do that 3 times a day for 3 weeks, so that's like 10 minutes of loading, right? Then think about that in 21 days, or in 7 days, you got 21 loading sessions. Okay. And then that compounds to 42, right? And that's how we're returning these guys back so quickly because we're essentially, we can really figure out what is the limiting constraint and then compress the training and the treatment to really start to scale that up. And in a high level athlete like that, remember they have the nervous system.
Yeah.
Right. So to your point, right? Like think about what you say, you know, when you told me the logic where it's like, hey, listen, like you may not get faster, but you can get slower. It's a great logic. I love it. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's the same thing. Like essentially, like if you look at the training effects that Lou got after just a couple of weeks and how much more hip IR he got, right? That's from leveraging that nervous system, right? And using it with a very specific intent to achieve a specific thing that we were after. And that thing that we were after was a limiting constraint that was biological. So the nervous system, so instead of just, so does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. The question would be figuring out what the thing is without assuming what the thing is, right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole other variable because now you can be, you know, moving the TV. TV example, doing a whole lot of work that's not really going to have any real impact because it's the wrong intent.
Yes.
For what you're trying to scale up.
Yes.
Right. Because somebody on Instagram may have the same type of injury per se or problem. So you saw that and it's like, well, I'm going to do that because they did that, but essentially it's not the same problem. And you waste all that time, you know, moving the wrong TV.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. You're 100%.
Yes.
You're 100% correct. Right. And so that kind of like leads us into like an assessment, right? So like these are, so these are all accessible things.
Yes. With the assessment, this will be interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of assessments out there.
Yes.
Like, you know, if you can't do a broomstick overhead squat, well, then you can't power lift, you know, stupid shit like that. Functional movement screens. There's all these different type of screens, right? So how does one navigate through what an actual real intentional focused assessment would be?
Yeah. Okay. This is a great question. Okay. And I do these assessments.
Yeah.
My colleague, Dr. Shivers, is the one that teaches the actual assessment course, which is essentially called Functional Range Assessment. That's under, and so I would say we should probably get him in on this, but let me because I don't want to bastardize, because it's a 2-day course, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to answer this question.
Well, where I'm really going with this is, you know, me back in my day is, you know, post pec tear. As long as I can touch the bar to my chest and lock it out, that's all the range of motion I need.
Yeah.
End of story, right? Whereas how it's incorrect, but that's how I would think.
Yeah.
On the vast end of that would be, no, you should be able to have, you know, this high degree, which is way outside of what I would ever use, and potentially even more outside of what I need as a human.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be a gymnast, or you see us. I don't need excessive ranges, right? So that's where I think this whole thing gets convoluted. Is you have the non-optimal super short side, right, which is probably kind of where most fall, and then this other side, which is unobtainable for most people, but is really, really cool for those people that are selling it because nobody can ever pass it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Or the answer's kind of here in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. I listen, I agree 100% with that logic. Okay. So this is so you're using the bench press because that's your sport as a feedback loop, as you should. Right. And obviously, you have your whole group of people that are like, well, you shouldn't be bench pressing. That's not what you've evolved to do, blah, blah, blah. Right. Like, but all of this stuff doesn't matter because we love to bench press. Like, right. Like that's,
well, outside of that, if it's a lineman, there's going to be a whole, you know what I'm saying? It's a different, maybe not, it could be the same answer. I don't know. That's what I'm asking you. Yeah. Right. Is because there's functional ranges that I believe we all should be able to go through.
Correct. Okay. And so you're using the bench press as a feedback loop. What I would say is you also have to have an assessment of the joint that is the shoulder.
Yeah.
And then you have to pair those feedback loops concurrently to kind of understand what is needed. Right. And so that's what we did with lineman special strength is we essentially went around and I assessed all the highest paid linemen. And then we figured out the specific joint ranges of motion that they all had. And we saw a convergence that, hey, look, all the high level guys have this and all the developmental guys that we're not able to convert don't have this. And so all we did was specifically constrain the training to get them to get those ranges of motion. And now guess what? Now those guys, we had a guy sign a huge contract this offseason, right? Like one of the high, right? And so to your point, so to specifically answer your question, so you have to use your shoulder joint as a feedback loop as well. So let's talk about the shoulder joint. So a joint, remember, is just a space between two bones. So that space can be objectively measured on a table where I can take your shoulder into external rotation, which would be this way, and internal rotation, which would be that way. And then I would get that measurement. And then you know how you use your bench press as a feedback loop? Now we have this assessment as another feedback loop. And then I can start to tell you, hey, Dave, you know how your bench press is going up? You go, yeah. I go, your shoulder joint range of motion is going down. You go, what? Normally I didn't figure that out until I injured myself. But now we have essentially another feedback loop of, hey, listen, your shoulder is accommodating to the bench press and now your shoulder is getting less healthier. Okay. So how we define it is the structure of the joint determines the function of the joint. So the shoulder is a ball and socket joint, which means that you have a ball relative to a shoulder blade. We're just going to keep it simple, right? So like people that are like high level, they may be like cringing as I start to but I just want to generally kind of like walk people through this, right? So you have essentially like, here's your shoulder blade, here's the ball. That ball, when you take it to 90 degrees, I'm seeing how much internal, external rotation I can have. Why? Because rotation is the fundamental thing that joint does because it's a ball relative to a socket. And so we're assessing, hey, does this thing rotate? Right? Yeah. And then when it rotates, how much does it rotate? And so these are very simple things. You can see it's not revolutionary. It's kind of like, hey, like when you bench press, what was the number? It's the same. I'm doing the same thing. Hey, when we go into internal rotation, you used to have 20. Your bench press is going up and now you have 15. So listen, we need to get that 5 degrees.
I love how you found the benchmarks to that because what that reminded me of is because we'd have a host of different max effort exercises, right? And if on average, the close grip incline press was, and this is before the shirts had bigger carryover, the close grip incline press would be, for a triple, about 62% of what the bench would be, floor press, 90%, So you we kind of figured out what that was. Now, if that close grip incline all of a sudden is 80%, then why in the fuck are you doing this? Right? Where's the deficit in the other one? So when you're going across and seeing, here's the range of motion from the top performers, you have that benchmark, right? To be able to see where this is actually really, really good. It might be too good. Probably don't want to restrict it, but it might be too good. And then this is way down. right? So then the focus can be more what I would call conjugate, more intent focused, with that.
Yeah. So listen, like that's why I give like guys like you, like that's why when people will kind of give me pushback, I'm kind of like think about the intricate feedback loop that you just described to me.
Yeah.
So that you guys can make decisions, right? So you're decreasing uncertainty so that your training gets more certain and better.
Yeah.
Right. But like people kind of like, they're just doing right. And so that's how I started to see that.
Well, there has to have correspondence to what you want to actually go up, right?
Yes.
You can build the shit out of one bench movement, but if it doesn't actually help the bench or help the thing that helps the bench, because there's layers, then all you're doing is extra work that you got to recover from, which is going to be impeding the shit that you need to actually do to recover from.
Right.
Yes.
You have the entire chain of logic, right? And now here's the thing. This is the shift. It's a shift one level deeper because you guys understand all of the lifts. And so you're walking me through your chain of logic, and I'm like, 100%. Like, this all makes sense. Like I don't understand it to be able to apply it, but I understand the general logic, and clearly it works.
Yes.
Right. So like that was the other thing that was nice being there. It's like, well, nobody else is this strong, so like I don't really care what other people are saying either, right? But think about it So one of the things that we've done is we think about like different levels. So when you're dealing with complex systems, there's different levels. And so what we did was we thought about like the level of competition, which is what you're describing. So it's the lift. It's when the nervous system is self-organizing its biological elements to give you an output that's very specific. And then you use that output, right? And that's why you can tell me like, hey, if your lift isn't here, I have these other special exercises that and that's what a lot of Louie and I would do together. When a lifter would come into town, we would kind of assess them, or an athlete, we would assess them. And then he would be like, hey, these are the special exercises. So I saw that directly from him. Like, oh, hey, well, right. And I'm asking, well, why are you doing this? Right. And he's telling me, and I'm like, oh, okay. The thing is, there's another level.
Yes.
And what we call that is the level of adaptation. So that's the internal level of the actual trainee or the athlete.
Yes. And that's the level we missed when I was there. Yes.
Okay. Because think about it. You're talking about a lift and you're going, hey, your lift stalled. Okay, don't worry about it. We have these other lifts. And so essentially it's another feedback loop. So you're right, it missed, but then we would go, well, hold on, it's not a lift. Maybe it's a joint or maybe it's a tissue. And that's where then that's where it requires, like you're saying, you're right. Like you can't do a movement screen and know it, right? You have to actually assess, like there has to be a practitioner that understands what they're like, what are they looking at? So I'm going to use you as the feedback loop. So you're going to tell me, John, like, and then think about it from my perspective too. It's like, you know how to train. So like if your bench isn't going up, like there's a real fucking problem and it's not your training. It's something that like we have to figure out what's going on here. And to your point, we don't want to waste a bunch of time just throwing shit on the wall because that's a lot of non-propagating work. So we do this assessment, and this assessment starts to reduce some of the uncertainty that we have. And now we can start to make decisions. We can start to see, okay, well, let's start to do this. And then we can start to see how you're responding to that stimulus, right?
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yes.
Okay. And that's why it's like, you really like the athletes that I work with, like we have these conversations, right? Because I value their feedback at the level of competition, because I'm saying like think about like one of the things when athletes would come in and, like Lou would be like, okay, hey, we got to figure out like special exercises for this athlete, right? Like he's trying to figure out like what it is that they need.
Yes.
Right. Like what, like and you're just trying to find that one thing, like what is missing. And then when you found it, like the results were exponential. So it's really worth, and that's probably why you kind of have that same mindset. Right. And like, so like, I don't want to shit on these assessments, on these movement screens and stuff. I don't use them. I essentially use it's very simple feedback loops. So in FRC, there's a component called a controlled articular rotation, where you're just, it's a very complex thing. You know, the course, I never want to like bastardize anything, right? So but I want to simply explain it so other people have an avenue to go down, that they're like, hey, I'm really interested in this. So what's a controlled articular rotation? That's a component of functional range systems. So Dr. Spina, right? And essentially what that is just taking the joint through its outermost rotational range of motion under control. And you can analyze that. So I can start to see, okay, like you don't move well in this zone, right? And then what I can do is then I can do a table test to overlay another feedback loop. So I kind of see like, hey, you don't move your joint real well. Now I'm going to take you on the table, and this is where it transitions into like an FRA, right? There's a lot of shit to know, right? But it's worth knowing it, because then you're doing just propagating work instead of a bunch of bullshit, right? And so then I can then see this analysis, and once you've done so many, you're kind of, you know where to challenge the joint at on the table, and then I can start to see the deficit on the table, and then I can go, okay, so Dave, here's what's going to happen. You don't have any internal rotation in your shoulder joint. So when you bench press, the reason why you throw your shoulder girdle is because this doesn't unlock. I need you to drive through your shoulder. That's why you can't get into your lat. That's why you're having an issue with triceps, all this other stuff. So now we've essentially taken, hey, and it's very simple. It sounds complex, but it's like, let me see how your nervous system sees your joint and what that workspace looks like. Let me assess it. Now that I have an assessment and I know the context that you are, I can now start to make it specific to you. And now I'm going, hey, Dave, I think that if you can normalize this joint, if you can get, if you normalize the joint and we get maybe like 10 degrees of range of motion, I think it's going to have an exponential effect, because this seems to be the number one limiting constraint.
So when you back this all out, right, and then because it becomes a whole nother layer to a concurrent system, right? So it becomes that next deeper layer, and you put that all together for the training for a high school lineman, then what does that look like from top layer all the way down?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. So what, and you'll appreciate this. I was just at a major university kind of discussing lineman special strength, right? And
need more time. Yeah, we'll need more time. Okay.
And essentially, so I won't name the university, but I was just there. And so essentially what ended up happening was, from my perspective and from Olin's perspective, is I thought that, when we talk about linemen, so one of the things that frustrates me, right, is, which is good because it motivates me to do things, right, is, you look at the sport of Olympic weightlifting, it's like, I respect them as athletes. So like, I'm not trying to do an Olympic weightlift. When I look at powerlifters, I respect them as an athlete, right? But like, when you look at a lineman, they're just like, yeah, they can do what a powerlifter does. And so what we had to do is we had to change the paradigm, right? And so how we went about doing that, like Olin and myself, is we said, like, listen, powerlifters are athletes and we need to respect them as athletes. They're absolute strength athletes. That's what they're trying to train for. They're trying to close that muscular strength deficit you discussed, right? The difference between absolute strength, maximal strength, and closing that deficit. That's what these guys are trying to do in these 3 lifts.
Yes.
And these lifts are super complex. If you look at like Perlpin's chart, you can see that's a whole way that they practice the lifts. So there's practice, there's training. People kind of get those things.
Yeah, but the practice and the training is kind of integrated in itself.
It 100% is.
Which isn't the case with alignment.
Correct. Okay, so what we did was we said, listen, we need the nervous system that a powerlifter has, but they have to actually dynamically move, right? So we layer in like, hey, there's these biological elements. So like we essentially, to make it simple, like the nomenclature in the manual is like, we have a base lift. So we have a base lift in the upper body and the lower body. And then we're using those lifts to run max effort and dynamic effort to scale up the lineman's nervous system.
Yes.
And because we're using the methods that you've used yourself, you understand how potent they are. So listen, we have no issue.
That's the easiest part.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
People might get pissed at that, but it really is kind of the easiest part.
Yeah. Listen, you guys figured it out.
Yeah.
Like that's why we're like, listen, like we're giving full credit to the Soviets, to first initially coming up with these methods to you guys tinkering with them for decades to figure out how, like, what is optimal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Now the transference is where you're going to go.
Yeah. Okay. So we have that running for the lineman's nervous system. So we have the base and then we have base joints. So then we have joints. So just like we train the nervous system, we're also training the joints. So your ankle joint, your hip joint, your spine, your shoulder joint, these joints get trained on a weekly basis.
So the joints would be what I would think of in powerlifting as the special exercises.
Yes. That we changed,
or not the special, the exercises that we use to drive the main lift. So say if the floor press had dynamic correspondence to my bench, right? Then I would train the floor press, but I also had to train the movements that made the floor press stronger.
Yes.
So the layers to that.
Yes.
Right. So those are the, instead of what I would say are movements, you're seeing is the joints.
Yes. And that's why then we say that's internal strength training.
Yes.
Because a joint is internal.
Yes.
Right? It's not external. A lift is external. So when you're training a lift, it's external strength training because that's the intent.
Yes.
Right? When we're training the joint, now we're trying to stimulate adaptation at the joint. So that's inside. That's at the level of adaptation.
Yes.
Okay. So how we would do it is we value joints. The lineman has to be really dynamic. They have to be able to get into their stance. They have to be able to load the posterior hip joint capsule. Think about if you're a left tackle.
Yes.
Right. Like if you're a left tackle and you have Myles Garrett here and he's sprinting this way, you have to sprint backwards and be able to absorb, dissipate. That's why it's a special strength.
Well, yeah. Absorbing force is a big thing because they have to cut, move.
Correct.
Right. So there's that stop, boom.
Correct.
Powerlifters don't do that.
Exactly. That's why you can't just take the Westside. That's why lineman special strength exists, because you scale up things way too much because a lineman, they have to be as strong as necessary.
Yes.
You guys have to be as strong as humanly possible. Like whatever the all-time world record is, like that's how strong you have to be because a lot of people you understand.
Yes.
That was the goal. Like when you were training, if I asked you what's your intent, you're going after an all-time world record.
Yes.
Okay. And then once you hit it, you would tell me, well, I'm going to try to beat it. So it's like, it's the Wild West of like neurological scaling.
Oh, yes. To the demise of everything else.
Yes.
Yes. So, yes.
Yeah.
That's the sport though.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that's 100%. Right. And so like, and so we leveraged what you guys figured out.
Yes.
And we said, okay, that's up and running, so we don't have to worry about that. Now the problem to solve is at the joint level and the connective tissue level. Okay. So
when you went to set the benchmarks for that, right? So you're not just looking at the shoulder, you're looking at all the other joints as well.
Correct.
To see what's average across the top performers.
Correct.
And then using that. And then when you have that, then how do you break it down to what the stimulus is going to be to train that?
Okay, this is perfect.
I didn't want to say exercise because it's stimulus.
Yes. Yeah, listen, man, this is a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how when you use max effort work, you're going to actualize the human nervous system to its potential to come into reality, right? And there's going to be constraints to that, like based off of your size, let's just say, right? Okay, well, there's also going to be constraints at the joint level. So what we've figured out is initially, like we want a very specific range of motion, right? And that's kind of like, this is what you have to have this as a minimum, right? But we can also have too much, right?
Yeah.
But essentially like what happens is when you start to, remember this nervous system is up and running. So now we're going to leverage this nervous system to start to now acquire access to the joint. But while we acquire access to the joint, remember we're doing it isometrically. So we're loading all the connective tissue. So the connective tissue is getting trained concurrently. Okay. So we're not creating passive ranges of motion. We're creating active ranges of motion. And then there's a strengthening effect. And then we have recovery days. And on the recovery days, we would do repeated efforts into that specific tissue to push that tissue even more.
Well, with the isometrics that are being used, how are they waving?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or progressing, you know what I'm saying? Because it can't be the same thing all the time because the adaptation is going to stop and it's not going to progress.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, you're correct. So let me answer this one question first, and then I'm going to answer that question. So the nervous system is up and running, okay? Because I thought about this, and you're the perfect person to have this conversation with, because so we're training the nervous system.
Yes.
So let's say that it's a max effort day. We're not going to make the assumption that the lineman's nervous system knows what the hip joint is.
True. Yeah.
So in regards to sequencing, before they go into the max effort, they're going to do a PALS and technically a rails. Like let's just say they're going to do very specific joint specific stuff based off their assessment.
All right. So we know what PALS are, right? So define rails.
Rails is going to be, remember, PALS means that the tissue is going to length.
Yeah.
So rails would be the opposite side. Okay, so it's the tissue is regressive. So we're training both sides of the joint and both sides of the tissue. And because length is a stimulus for connective tissue, so when you're progressing, the load is at length, and that's why you get more length.
Yes.
In the connective tissue. Okay, but regressively, you have to close that gap. So the rails is to teach the nervous system about the new range you just opened up.
Got it.
So when you do PNF and you only do one side, we're doing both sides.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what the PALS and rails are.
Okay.
And so we would essentially pick the base joint, and this is based off of their intake, their assessment. So we know, hey, this guy's got an issue in the posterior hip joint capsule. We know he's got an issue in the ankle. And so we're putting them in specific, it would be like special exercises. We're putting them in very specific positions so that then they're getting that training stimulus into the joint capsule prior to then training, but it's at a low effort. So it's just 30%. Start to show your nervous system what this tissue is. And then we always do some controlled articular rotation so that then the nervous system starts to move that joint through its outermost range of motion. And now we're like, the nervous system is going, I know what this hip is. I know what this ankle is. And now we're going to progress them into their neurological training. Okay. And so now what we're going to do, and Dr. Shivers and myself came up with a concept called the neurological network of absolute strength. Because this starts to, so when you start to look at things from the inside out, and there's different levels, the nomenclature gets caught up. Okay, so when you were training, and you were doing all your max effort work, you were doing your max effort work for lifts to degree. Let's just say, okay, but we're using it to build up an internal network of like essentially like, and now it's becoming more popular. Like this is starting to pick up. We've written extensively about it on, we have like a Substack called Absolute. And we've written extensively about this neurological network. Okay. And this neurological network, essentially like that's what you're scaling up. So like think about like a neurological synergy where you have your nervous system and then you have like a nerve cell and a muscle cell and you're trying to create synergies between them. And so like that's the internal effect of like, let's say max effort.
Yes.
You with me?
Yes. So you're trying to make that as enhanced as it possibly can be.
Yeah, that's why we're so in the linemen specifically, we're using the max effort to build up a neurological network.
Okay.
And then you know how you told me that you use like a lift as a feedback. So then we know, hey, this guy's got a 850 box squat with green band tension. We're like, he's got the neurological network. Like, why is he not converting?
Yes.
Right? Remember when you gave me the bench press example?
Yeah.
So then we know, like, listen, in regards to intensity, so if we use the intensities in the science and practice of strength training, where it's stimulating, retaining, and then detraining, he doesn't have to be at a stimulating, and he's strong enough. So we're gonna go through the joint first. Then what we're gonna do is we're going to essentially stimulate the neural net with max effort training. So he's gonna take a training max, and that's constrained, right? Because it's the same thing. Like we did what nobody else really you ever hear them do, where we put numbers because like one of the guys, he's he's the highest paid lineman right now in the specific position, but he's box squatting 850 with green band tension. And like, there's a lot of runway.
Yeah.
And we're like, whoa. You like the one thing you don't need is more neurology. because with my history at Westside, I'm like, listen, like we gotta constrain this, right? So to go through that, so we're going through the joint first, then we're going to the nervous system, and then this is the beauty of Olin. So Olin.
So how is that constrained then while still getting the max effort output?
Yeah, so it would be, it's technically not a stimulating intensity, it's a retaining intensity, right? Because we're not trying to push the network, we're just trying to.
Okay.
Does this make like?
Yeah.
They're not doing it within. They're strong. In other words, they're strong enough.
Yes.
So like, listen, just give us a 650.
I get it. So you're not making them go to a slower tempo or anything like that. It's just, here's the cap. That's the effort that we need. It's within striking range to retain it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because let's take that one step further. Like if you're an offensive lineman, the average offensive lineman is 317 pounds. So you got to be able to move yourself and that.
Yes.
So like like you
650s. Yeah. 600. Yeah.
Right. So you know, there's band tension on there. We don't count it. Right. But like you just need to be able to. We need to know that you have the nervous system to displace that load.
Yes.
That's what we need to know.
Got it. Yep.
Right. And so once we know that, and so then what we say is like, okay, now the neural network is humming, because it's like, okay, I just took and we're just doing one rep, so the nervous system can compress, like they come out of their stance once, right? So we're trying to get that compression of the nervous system, and then we go into like, you'll appreciate this. So Olin, like it's funny, these guys study film like crazy. Right. So there's a lot of parallels between like a high level power lifter and a high level offensive lineman. Like they can tell you details that you're completely like, you know how Rumsfeld says like there's known knowns and then there's like unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they're exposing you to all these feedback loops and you're starting to see like, oh wait, you're telling me that this is an issue or that's an issue, right? So Olin sent me this article to read, right? And essentially it kind of had to do with, it was written by Bill Parcells. And it had to do with like, hey, most linemen don't come into the NFL physically developed. That's why they have this like, you know, it takes like 2-3 years for these guys to hit their steam because they're missing some of these elements of lineman special strength. And so then it's like they either figure it out in 2 to 3 years or they just are out of the league. So you kind of have like a 2 to 3 year window to figure out like, what are your limiting constraints and like, are you addressing them or not? Yeah. Okay. So one of the things is, and you've articulated this tremendously. Okay. And I like how, I love how you're thinking because you're like, okay, well, like, how are you getting transfer of training? Right. So remember, like they have to be able to move. We've identified their movement issues and we've addressed that first thing. Right. Then we stimulate the nervous system because the nervous system has to be able to output. Right. But we put the constraints on that. Right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to transition them to instead, what we did was instead of using special exercises, we call it special practice. So we have a pass pro drill and we have a leverage drill. And what Olin does is he looks at the film and he figures out, you know, the mini-max? He finds the mini-max because remember, we're looking at what the lineman does as a special strength. So he's seeing where the nervous system isn't outputting how it should be and where the blocking is breaking down. Okay. And then he's essentially got 2 drills because I don't want to simplify it, right? He could go on for hours about what he's doing, right? But essentially it's like, if it's an issue with run blocking, they get put into a leverage drill. Olin has now watched the film. He knows exactly where this guy is breaking down at. He's going to put them into that position. And now we're running isometrics into that position. Okay. And they're either going to be overcoming or yielding. Yep. Okay, they're going to be at different effort levels. Why? Because now we know what the joint is. So we hit a limiting constraint on the joint. We've stimulated that neural net. So the nervous system's paying attention. And now we're like, learn this. Learn this. This is where you're breaking down. That's why it's special practice to you. Right? So the concept of a special exercise is something where it's like, it's special kind of to you because this is what you need. Yes. Right? I know I'm kind of like stretching that definition from its origins, right? But I'm trying.
Not necessarily though, because if it is a power lifter and you're dealing into the weeds, you know, then the joint that's going to be developed at that level of that training day is going to follow the same basic principles, what you're saying.
Yes. Yes. The only difference is the linemen's, they have to practice.
Yes.
Okay. So remember, so like, that's where we took a lot of the unnecessary volume. So then we put in practice. So right after the nervous system, because lineman special strength, you know how you were talking about absolute strength and maximal strength, that's a nervous system capacity. So like that just got stimulated, but we have to get it to transfer over. If not, all this work is for nothing.
Yes.
Right. And so that's why then they immediately go into the essentially like we have an entire isometric continuum that they do in either the leverage drill or a pass pro drill that's special to them. And then once we get the output that they want, then that's when we go and we clean up the other biological elements that are essentially missing. So you'll see, like, that's where you'll see repeated efforts for white connective tissue. You'll see repeated efforts for red muscle tissue, but it all depends on what they need.
Yes. Right? That will change as they develop that capacity. Then you can back off that capacity because there's always something.
Yeah.
There's always
100%.
another thing, right? So you have to prioritize what those things are and not, because that can be the other thing is there may be 10 different things that he looks at the films and you got to prioritize which one is the most important.
Correct.
To be able to develop. So if that's that max effort day, then what does a dynamic day look like?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I love it. So then remember when I say like, so everything is really joint first, because their ability to come up with complex movement solutions is like really needed. They have to be able to get into their stance. They like a lot of like, they have to be in the position. Like when you really think about what a lineman does, like if they're in the right position, it's kind of like this quasi isometric type thing, right? And so like their ability to be able to like move into the depth and like all this stuff, right? So that's why joints are such a high priority for us. That, and it also becomes the number one reason that takes them out. So remember how you were discussing how like if you didn't have to work through these injuries, your nervous system would have just kept. So like that's another reason, like we're kind of hedging against that issue. So on dynamic effort days, now what the lineman has to do is we're trying to teach that neural net to output faster. Right? Okay. But before we do that, we're going to max effort the joints. Okay. Okay. Because, this was kind of, like, I always like the quote. I always tell Olin, like, Einstein has a quote where it's like, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research. So we kind of joke around that like, hey, we're going to do research because nobody else is viewing the lineman this way. And we're really trying to, we're like, our goal is to develop linemen, right? Like not just talent acquisition. So like, we're really like, we're working with guys that they're like, hey, this guy's a seventh round draft pick. He's not going to make it, blah, blah. Like everybody thinks we work with like the highest level guys. We work with those guys too, but the majority of the guys that we're working with, they're missing a couple of these elements. So we're trying things, right? We're just doing research. So, what we ended up doing is those pails and rails, we run them at a max effort. So they do let's say that they take their joint through its outermost range of motion. That's called a controlled articular rotation. Once again, they have a specific position. Based off of that specific position, they do their max effort pails and rails. And then they go back through their cars. And now they've essentially trained the joints maximally. And now we're going to try to make them as dynamic and violent as we can. Okay. And then boom, and then we take them right back into, and I should have said too, like a lot of the guys on the max effort day like contrast stuff. So maybe as they're working with their way up to a training max, they're also doing contrast stuff so that they get that relative strength stimulus too, right? I'm kind of watering it down, but yeah, and so they do that, and then what ended up happening was, so does that answer that question? So then. So when I was at Westside, right, I can only treat like one person at a time, but I kept seeing like let's call it like the same kind of type of joint dysfunction where I'm like, listen, I kind of think that this is the pathway out, right? But we had to essentially standardize that to a degree. Right. And so what we did is I have a colleague out in California. His name's Brian Fox. And so we essentially have a online joint specific training programs. And so what we did was I've assessed so many of these linemen. It's the same thing with like, once you like, let's use the bench press as an example. you're going to see that like, as you continue to do the bench press, from my perspective, when we start to look at cars and we start to do these table assessments, you start to see the same tissue accommodating.
Yes.
Okay. So then we can say like, I can say like, listen, if I see this and if I see this, okay, so there's the assessment part, which is the most important part, like you said. Now I can say, okay, like, listen, you can train this joint and you need to train this connective tissue regularly, but like I just don't have the ability to do that myself. And so that's when we essentially gain access. And then that's what like a lot of the lifters at Westside, that's what they use, right? Because then they can come see me and I'm like, hey, listen, this is what you need to be doing.
Yes.
Right. And so how did we scale that out for the linemen? We essentially built specific protocols for the linemen, saying like, listen, we see shoulders that are doing this, right? You start to see things where it's like, okay, because of the center position, right? And how they're snapping the ball and rotating it, like their shoulders, they accommodate in a different way than a guard.
Yes.
So like they need a specific shoulder. And so we essentially created those so that those guys have the ability to do that digitally. And essentially the training that we did it's super compressed. So it's like 10 to 15 minutes so that we get high compliance.
Yes.
And then that's what's enabled us to really scale this so that the linemen and we've scaled it to like general population, like anybody can, it's the training that me and Brian do. It's our joint training that we've essentially done so that we can go through it. And then we can say like, hey, you know, this is how you would do that. And so we can, does that answer the?
Yeah. Cause it's kind of the same thing that you saw at Westside, because if everybody's kind of doing the same thing, for the most part, the same problems are going to happen as their strength increases. The same deficits are going to show. So you saw the same thing with alignment. Like as that skill acquisition develops and as that strength develops, this is going to be the lagging indicator.
Yes.
You know, most of the time.
Yes.
Right. There'll be outliers, but most of the time that's what it is.
Correct.
And that's implemented in what you put together.
Correct. Yeah. And then it's kind of crazy, man, because I kind of thought it was such a daunting task like 2 or 3 years ago. But then what's crazy is so I'll give you a case in point. So I'm working with Ola and I are working with all these linemen. And so I do a lot of the programming, like I'll go there and like a lot of guys fly in or I'll go there. We kind of get the baseline assessment. And then once we have their blueprint, like it becomes easy, like, as you know, it becomes easier and easier.
It can be templated to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, all these guys with all these dysfunctional hips and shoulders, and I'm like, fuck, man, like we can't be like taking training maxes and these guys like, so that's why I can kind of see why like some strength coaches may not use it because they know this guy's got a dysfunctional joint. But to like your thing, it's like, well, what are they doing in the clinic to normalize it? What are they doing in training to normalize? Nothing. So it's just going to continue to get worse and worse. Right. So it was interesting. So the past 2 off seasons, so we'll do like an assessment in the off season and then kind of an assessment before training camp. Right. And so you know how like Louie never wanted to work with football players, kind of like the point that we were discussing, like how you got into powerlifting, how I got into bodybuilding. Yeah. It's kind of like the season, you see all of the training, all of the work you've done, it just erodes away so quickly. Right. So that's why like Lou was like, well, they have a season. So like they just come back. It's the same. So I can see why he never really wanted to work with them.
Well, yeah. Well, that's going to bring up the next question, because when, and this happens so many times, you know, they'd come in, you know, after the season and it'd be like, they're weaker than when they left. Then it's like, okay, let's get them strong again. Then you get them stronger than what they were previous year. Then the same cycle continues. Right.
Yes.
And I love him to death. He's a mentor of mine. You know, I don't ever want to say anything bad about Louie, except there's Jekyll and Hyde, as you know, but you know, that was his personality. Right. But I don't think he really understood that when they're in season, if they're playing, there's contact, man. There's a lot going on there that, unless, maybe this isn't true, but unless you've done it, you don't really get it. Right. Because unless, of course, if they're not starting, whole different conversation. But,
right.
You know, they're, especially the NFL, it's a long ass fucking season. They're getting pounded, you know, so things have to change, you know, and a couple things happen. Things change automatically because they're no longer doing this program, they have to do this program, especially if it's D1, so they're defaulting to a program that may not be optimal for them. And they can't resist against it because you don't want to push back against the authority. You want to play ball. There's a lot of other factors that kind of go on in there. We had a couple guys that would just basically just say, I can't do this exercise because it hurts my knee, or I can't do this exercise because it hurts. So they basically lie their way through to be able to do the movements, and they would always come back a little bit better. But you still have to deal with that same thing, right? So as soon as they go in, so the question would be, what aspects of the training do you have them maintain during the season so they don't come back worse? They're still going to come back worse, right? Because the season's going to beat them up, but they don't come back worse off than they need to be.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. So that's what I thought too. But from a joint perspective, so once we created these protocols, it's interesting. We do the assessment and like these guys' joints are actually holding, right? So what used to be like extreme dysfunction, now we're seeing is like, hey, you just lost 5 degrees. So now we're starting significantly better.
Interesting.
Right. So like 2 years ago, if you would have told me, I would have been like, man, like, I'm going to be treating these linemen forever. Now I'm like, listen, like if they follow this protocol and like if the assessment is done correctly and we put them into the right loading positions for their joint, like we're not actually paying that toll. Now, so to answer your question very specifically, so two things. Remember when I was telling you about research and how it seemed like odd to put max effort internal stuff and then pair it with external dynamic stuff? It's funny. I tried to pull it. So I tried to pull it. There's like a training wave and I was like, listen, I'm just going to pull it. As soon as I pulled it, I had like 4 guys call me. They're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, you don't want me to pull this? And they're like, well, no. And I was like, well, I just kind of want to see like what this sequencing does for you guys. And they're like, no, like we're not. And so that told me right there how important the joint stuff was. And that's why the joint stuff in regards to the sequencing always comes first. So one of the things that we did, so when you start to think about, a neurological network of absolute strength, right? So you're thinking about, it from the internal. So, and we know that these guys are strong enough, right? Like this is a hard paradigm to get across people. Like we have guys, we got a couple kids in college that are high level linemen. And like, I'm telling them like, guys, it sounds crazy, but you don't have to get any stronger. That's how effective that like the stuff that you guys figured out, that's how effective it is, right? It's so effective that you have to cap it. That's how effective it, right? Okay. And so what ended up happening was now we can start to go into training camp and we have the ability to know they have the neurology. And now training camp starts to become a conversion process because you've referred to transfer of training. Okay. Well, when you start to look at it from a neural network perspective and you know that they have the network, right? Believe it or not, we actually pull all max effort loading in camp. We did it the first time last season and everybody's like, oh, no, right? Because, these athletes become really reliant on it. I mean, I'm the same way. Like you probably are to like where it's like, hey, we're going to pull this. But the reason why we made the decision to pull it is like, listen, we know these guys are strong enough and we don't want to confuse the network. Right? Because they're going to your point, like what you've been describing is all the type of chaotic loading that they're going to go through in training camp when they go live. So we actually pull, so like that's kind of like a big deload for us. So like that training camp, believe it or not, because we come prepared. So they're prepared to engage. They have the neurology and they have the biological elements. And now it's like, hey, like get as violent as you can to convert this. Once they get through that phase, that's when then we start to reintroduce, and it depends on the guy. It depends on if we reintroduce max effort, because we're just saying like, hey, you know how you told me like you concede the point that people aren't going to get stronger, but they can get slower. So we just concede. We're like, listen, they're going to get weaker in season, unfortunately. So that's why we have that buffer of like 15 to 20, because we're going to give that up going into the season, but then we're going to stimulate that neurology either through max effort or dynamic effort. And it kind of depends. So that's where it becomes real nuanced, because when you talk to guys, they'll be like, well, listen, like I have to do it. Like if I'm playing on Sunday, I want to hit my training max on Saturday. It sounds crazy, right? Or you could have guys that go like, listen, I found out what works for me is dynamic effort on Fridays, because then my nervous system, right? So we kind of just, that's where it's like, that's where I think it starts to delineate between like a system and a strategy, where it's like, well, what's best for you? Like a system is kind of like these templates. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop these linemen and teach these linemen how to really be responsible for their own training.
Well, this makes sense too, because if we back out from a concurrent system, and if you look at how very, very basically how block systems would work. A block system would work in this block, you're going to develop this certain motor ability. This motor ability is going to take X amount of time before it's going to actually decrease. The different motor abilities are going to decrease at different rates. And so that block will build on this block, knowing that this motor ability can be maintained just with some of the supplemental stuff that's in that block to be able to do that. And then it kind of progresses through, where with this joint stuff that you're talking about, that motor ability is being maintained through the specific skill work that they're doing in season, right? Where the absolute strength motor ability is built at a surplus. So it kind of, in a way, when I was at Westside, this inherently was kind of at play, mainly because of PEDs, because they're going to change. So max efforts are going to drop. So if the max efforts are going to drop, and usually a 10% drop would be acceptable. If it drops more than 10%, well, maybe I need to take a shot of test or something to be able to get it back to that 90%. But it was known that that's going to drop for obvious reasons. You're not going to be bloated. There's going to be a lot of other things that are going to play into that. But that builds into that, it makes sense is kind of what I'm saying, because certain abilities drop faster than others, right? The absolute strength can maintain a little bit longer than what people think it is, especially in the context to which you're talking about, right? And then even the drop when it's at a surplus, so what, right? But the joint stuff that you're talking, they can still do that. Right. And I assume they still are doing that. Yeah. Right. So that's being maintained through there. Meanwhile, their specific skills of what their position coaches and stuff, that's being ramped up during that time period where something has to come out, because you can't just keep stacking stuff upon stuff. Correct. Right. So that this all makes sense. Yeah. Right. Where I think what players were trying to do before was not realizing that. Right. And then not, because they may, as you just said, it becomes nuanced. Some may need, to put in some kind of max effort load every third week. Right. Yeah, for sure. And it may not have to be in the context of what they would do in the off season. It just to be in the context to be able to keep the nervous system to be able to maintain that ability. 100%. Yeah. You 100% got it. Right. And like you have it. I think the reason why you pick up on it so fast is because you were an absolute strength athlete at the highest level. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what these guys are too. The difference is, because think about it, then we like, if you start to use the methods, right? Like think about like on Sundays or whenever they play, like that's kind of just repeated efforts, but it could ramp up to like some low, like max, and the stimulus is so high from that level that like you can't, you're going to burn these guys out. So that's why it's kind of like, hey, listen, you can start to, and this is where Olin's really good. He'll start to see where like guys aren't popping on film. Right. So you'll start to see this stagnation on film where it's like, hey, I think like whatever you think you need to do, maybe it's like, maybe take a dynamic effort, like, and then subsequently, because you know how like you guys are so efficient at using lifts as those feedback loops. So think about like he played, he's a Pro Bowler for, I don't even know how many years, probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. Right. And so like he's been there, but then he breaks it down. Right. Okay. And then it's like, he can see on film when guys are stagnating. Yes. Right. And then that's when it's like, hey, listen, I don't know what's best for you,
Like, you know what's best for you because you've now been doing this training for this duration. But I think that you should probably either do like a dynamic effort, or maybe you should do a max effort. Like, do whatever your nervous system responds best to, and then you see that corresponding pop, where it's like the nervous system, that neural net has been like maximally stimulated again, or dynamically stimulated, and then you're getting almost like that. It's truly like a more of a delayed potentiation, right? Because just like anything, like you could stagnate, like, just like you stagnate to a lift, these guys are going to stagnate to like the special strength they have, which is blocking. So when he's able to start to see that, and then he's able to start to be like, like, hey, I think you need to tap into that CNS.
Yes.
So it's not a lot of, and that's the thing too, is like, we don't want to confuse the nervous system. Right. So like if we do too much, like the nervous system doesn't know, like, do I get better at a box squat or do I get better at blocking? That's why we have that kind of thing where we pull it, and guys are like, oh, I'm kind of paranoid. It's like, listen, that anxiety that you have, like, take it out on the field. Like, that's where you need to be getting aggressive with your force generation, right? Because you don't want guys to get part of like the sequencing of max effort and dynamic, it's so potent, right? That guys love doing it because you're getting the results, but you're not a power lifter.
Yeah.
Right. So like we have to be able to really constrain that, so that we're just leveraging, essentially everything that the Soviets and you guys figured out to use it for our specific purposes.
Yes. Which, I mean, it kind of goes back in a way to when Louie would try to explain the max effort. It's, yes, the PRs are important, but it was the actual, he would say it's the strain, but it's the system, that's being utilized.
The nervous system.
And in many ways, the movement really didn't matter.
Correct.
Right. So if you're too beat up, but then you're going to use a movement that might be a lower load, but you're still going to do that same strain. And the other interesting thing is when the powerlifters will speak about max effort, they think about this 100%. And what I like to remind them is, how many times was it ever 100%? Right? Because usually you say if you broke the PR, but you had 20 left, that's not 100%.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Or you missed it. But the one you did before that was still not 100%. It's rare that it's actually that 100%. And so there is a variance in there. And a lot of times where the stimulus may only have to be 85, 90% to be bar weight, to be able to get the output.
Yes.
And this is what you're basically telling me with these guys with the constraint, right? The stimulus doesn't have to be that 100% for it to be defined max effort. So the name actually kind of sucks, when you think about it, because it will confuse people. But that's not actually what's going on. Right? It's the response of the nervous system to that stimulus.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
Where when you broke it down to that joint level, with the isometric, it's still max effort. You see, so the name sucks. I get it. The name sucks.
Yes.
But it's what's there. And where do you see the evolution of what you're doing moving forward? Like, what right now are you like, holy shit, we didn't expect this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Expect to be able to hold on to joint function in season, right? Like that was, are we talking about lineman special strength?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that was shocking, but that was a huge relief. The reason why that was a huge relief is because it was such a huge limiting constraint. And like a lot of this stuff, like, we're talking about like an assessment. So now maybe I just have to do one assessment, or I can refer to a colleague of mine that understands like the joint assessment. Like, and now these guys are able to have access to that training. Like the constraint was like a scaling on like practitioners' side of things. Right. And one of the things that I wanted to do was like really scale this out for everybody. Right. And so that was kind of shocking because like I said, man, like I'm used to assessing like highly dysfunctional joints. So it's kind of crazy. Like this last off season when I flew out to Chicago, because that's where Olin is at, and we have that's where his facility's at. And that's where a lot of the guys fly into, and like we'll get them established there, and then they kind of go back and forth depending on what team they're with and stuff like this. And so it's really reduced the burden on us, because we can kind of like really leverage that and get those guys onto that. And then think about it, like that's kind of like the main constraint that we had. So we can get that initial assessment. This guy can start to understand what's wrong with his joint, the training positions that he's got to get in, like what he needs, right? So that was really pleasantly surprised, because this past off season, I'm assessing joints and I'm like, these things are normal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, wow, like that really took me back, because like, I'm like I said, like think about it, like, you're assessing, let's say, Louie Simmons' shoulder,
yes,
who, unfortunately didn't train any joint capsule, and you have, no internal rotation. And like, these guys are actually not losing it in season. They're giving me, when you get to the end range of a joint, very simply, like if I take this joint, like, so you see like this joint, I'm taking it into extension. So there's an opening side to the joint, which is on this side, and you can see that white connective tissue stretch. And then there's a closing side of the joint. So when you take a joint to end range of motion, you only want the rate limiter to be white connective tissue.
Yes.
You don't want it to be this hard block. And like a lot of linemen have like hard blocks in the front of their hips, in the front of their ankles. And like when that occurs, it's kind of like, okay, like, hey, that's where you start to get the bone spurs and then osteoarthritis type stuff, right? And so, man, that was a huge relief to me, to the point where we had one guy who's played in the league for a couple years. He had bilateral Liz Franks and bilateral labral tears in the hip, and like no IR. And then when he ended up doing it, by the time I assessed him before training camp, I mean, like he actually, like I had to assess him like 3 times because I couldn't believe it myself. So when you're talking about shocking, like that was shocking. The other thing that it's really made me appreciate, like I said, I keep going back to like people that kind of came before us, right? Like it makes me appreciate the Soviets, what you guys did at Westside, right? And really being able to figure out like how to train the nervous system to really scale up, because it's the same thing. Like in season, like you don't have to because we were conceding that we're going to give up some, and then we're using football as a feedback mechanism to see when they need that neurological stuff. It's kind of the lack of volume that they need to when they hit the off season, they still they're instead of being burnt, they're burnt out. Right? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, these guys are like, it's brutal, right? But like, it's kind of interesting. They're craving the training, right? Because like, they know how successful they're going to be. Does that make sense?
If they're burnt out, they're just burnt out from the season.
Correct.
Right? So it's like more mental burnout, maybe some biological burnout.
Yeah.
But if the joints are coming back, kind of as you left them, then that burnout, the time it's going to take to spin it back up is going to be reduced substantially.
Yeah, 100%. So in that initial off-season phase, what we try to do is just really normalize connective tissue. Because now that we've kind of, the joint issues that we were seeing, we're not seeing anymore. So now the issue for us is connective tissue. Okay, so connective tissue, and this is where, a lot of this is like Dr. Spina and Dr. Shivers kind of, remember when I told you I was taking continuing education, and I would ask people like, hey, how do you know when you're done? Well, that in regards to connective tissue specific treatment and training, that question actually got answered for me. Okay. And it got answered when I was taking an FR, and that's something that Dr. Shivers teaches as an FR. That's something that we teach in the internal strength model, which is a seminar where we go through all the trainable biological elements. That's something that Dr. Spina also teaches, right? And essentially so when you take white connective tissue and you think about that composite of tissue, when you go to take it to length, right, it should have a certain behavior. So for every 1 unit of length that you put into the tissue, you should get a corresponding 1 unit of tension. Okay. And that's normal connective tissue architecture. Right. And once again, so that listeners understand, like I'm taking essentially like hours of lecture and kind of reducing it to a very simple concept.
Yeah.
To where it's like, I would refer people to like these sources and these individuals because like, I'm making it sound like it's quite simple, but there's actually a lot of different curves that you have to get to get to this point, right? And so what we see is that normal 1-to-1 ratio of length to tension when we're assessing connective tissues. So like hamstring, like low back, like that connective tissue is not, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's like a 1-to-2 ratio. So for every 1 unit of length that I put into the tissue on assessment, I'm getting a corresponding 2 units of tension. Okay. And so that's called the length tension, or like the stress strain curve of tissue. And so that's kind of the issue that we're really trying to solve right now, right? Because, like I said, you know, you make a great point where it's like, we have to concede certain things. And obviously, like, nobody's playing the sport of football to get healthy connective tissue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, we're going to concede that to a degree, but that's the real, but like, once again, when you get into like treatment and training connective tissue, like everything that you've described is totally accurate, right? Like, we have to load this tissue, but like, you know, yeah, I mean, there's still a huge gap in how we execute that at a decentralized level, where it's like somebody can be in Annapolis, this guy can be in Pittsburgh, this guy can be in Cleveland, and so that's kind of.
Well, doesn't building the strength of the connective tissue doesn't the muscle become kind of in the way, right? Because the connective tissue and the muscle kind of work together. Right,
yeah, 100%.
Right. And strengthening tendons, you know, connective tissue has always kind of been one of the issues, right? Because the muscle can get stronger than the tendon, and then you got that issue.
Yeah.
You know, one of the arguments against PEDs, which true, maybe not, you know, whatever. But it's still inherently that issue is the dilemma becomes, how do you strengthen the connective tissue? Right. And, you know, the default answer are going to be, you know, isometrics, you know, ultra high rep sets, but all that is still outside of the isometrics. It's still the muscles doing. It would be great, you know, if you could strengthen the connective tissue, but not have the muscle have to do anything.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the problem.
Yes. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Because when you like, kind of the basic concept is when you do an isometric, right? When you look at how force accumulates in certain tissues, like normally when you do like a concentric, or when the muscle shortens or lengthens, there's a change in tissue length. And that change in tissue length is because the connective tissue, the muscle is moving too, but the connective tissue is. But when you do, like if I do an isometric and I pull here, like that's stress stiffening, and then the force starts to accumulate in that connective tissue, right? And then that's the type of loading that the connective tissue needs to maintain normal architecture.
Yes, but the issue then becomes, how is that progressively loaded and waved and basically conjugated in a way to where it's just not the same stimulus over and over and over, you know, which the body adapts to, then you're going to run into the same problems that we're talking about.
Correct. So how that gets done is you can train connective tissue. So when you think of a load, think about like, when you talk about like a max effort load, let's say for this discussion that the majority of that load goes into the nervous system, because that's what's getting scaled up. Is, remember that MSD, for everybody listening, that gap's getting closed. So propagating work is occurring where we're closing the MSD. Okay, when you're in season, right? For connective tissue, it's getting chaotically loaded at different force vectors and different velocities. It's having to stress stiffen. And that's why, because of the chaotic, like when we're in the weight room, we can control the loading to a much higher degree. Like the barbell, even though we're interfacing with the barbell, it's not, I mean, she's like generally speaking, like it's quite static.
Yes.
Right. But when you're trying to block, like those tissues are going to like they're going to start to become abnormal. right? And it's something that we have to get better at doing, right? But to answer your question, so we essentially have, in the ISM, we have what's called a length loading progression. And that's a logical way for how you add load into white connective tissue. And so it starts off, we take it through like an entire continuum. So from the clinical setting all the way into loading, right? And so essentially it would start with what we call isometric ramping. Okay, and isometric ramping is something you would do for injured tissue. Like if you injure your pec and, you know, you have a grade 1 strain, pretty common, you know, we would say like, okay, hey, like you feel this tissue, just start to contract into that tissue. And it's kind of like throwing a pebble into a water, and the force, it's non-directional. It kind of gets in and it stimulates all of that connective tissue. So it's a very safe way to start isometric loading. You know, if you have a hamstring strain in the NHL, you got an adductor strain, like we're immediately getting into isometric ramping, right? And then the next would be like actual treatment of that tissue, hands-on treatment where you're palpating length tension curves and loading very directional based off of the abnormal tension that you're finding through the skill of palpating tissue and moving that tissue to length, right? And then next thing it would be what essentially generally would be like some sort of positional isometric. So just an isometric that isn't at length, because then the next progression would be a PALS, because remember, length is stimulating for connective tissue. So all of the stuff before positionals is not at length.
Yes.
Right. So now we're saying, hey, we got good connective tissue architecture. Let's start to load it at length. And now we're starting to get more length. Okay. And then obviously length is going to now be eccentrics.
Yes.
So now that eccentric continuum of like, you know, essentially like you would do eccentrics, then you would have like eccentric quasi-isometrics. You could have super maximal eccentrics, and you could have overspeed eccentric catches. Okay, so the problem with in season for us is we can only really do static stuff for the tissue because all the dynamic chaotic stuff is happening there.
Yes.
So to your exact point, the reason why I kind of walked through that entire long-winded thing is because like we're constrained only statically. So like we don't get these unique tissue behaviors. Like when you take a tissue to length, that's a behavior of the tissue. It's going to length. We can't do that because, I mean, you can to a degree, but like, once again, like we're in season. So you have to, and the only feedback loop that matters is what they're doing. Right. So like we can't lose like in a perfect world, yeah, we would do that. But like if they're playing really well, and they have abnormal tissue and we know about it, we just have to really leverage, you know, like the more of the static loading strategies. And we can't really go dynamic because obviously we don't want, it's abnormal tissue.
Yes.
Right. So like and so, yeah, that's something that, I mean, listen, we have a lot of stuff that we need to work on, right?
Yeah.
But I would say in regards to what, you know, if you look at why guys can't play, it's because of joint issues and connective tissue. Right? Like we're not saying like, hey, this guy is too strong.
No.
Right? So once again, it kind of gets skewed to that. And so I think, you know, we still have a lot of work to do in that regard where we're looking at like tendons, like the Achilles tendon. We're looking at, you know, the pec tendon. Like you see these pec ruptures all the time, right? So it's like, you know, like that's something, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had. Right. But we see a trend where it's like, hey, this tissue is becoming abnormal in season. So we can see how these ruptures occur. Right. So like that's probably where, right. And then that's where we start to get into some of the different training that we've been doing for that, which is I don't know if you want to go into it, but that's kind of how we came up with oscillating isometric muscle actions, which is like a really long, but I think that's one of the solutions to this abnormal connective tissue.
Now, with that, what are you talking about? Like med ball catches and shit like that? Okay.
So remember we have overcoming isometrics and yielding isometrics.
Yeah.
Right. And when you do an overcoming isometric, when in the latest literature, what they say is like, when you do an overcoming or a pressing, neurologically, you're thinking about the object that you're pressing. So your intent is kind of like, hey, I'm going to press onto this table. So you're thinking more external.
Yes.
Okay, but if I try to hold this and I go, hey, you feel where your biceps are? Can you hold there? See, like the hold is going to hold into the connective tissue, which I know is very nuanced, but like in a clinical setting for like, if there's people that are doing clinical work, like when I'm doing clinical work, the coaching cue I always give, hold in place. Okay. And then like when they're holding, then that's when I can start to essentially like I could wrap a band around and I can start to like oscillate.
Got it. Yeah, I get it.
Okay. So we'll kind of just walk through that where it's like, so what's happening is the red muscle tissue is doing an isometric. The reason why we did oscillating isometric muscle actions, and Jim Seitzer helped us with this, because we've been using tons of like band bells and other things like the Rhino Flex Bar and stuff like that. But if you think about it, like, you know, when you're doing a holding isometric muscle action or a yielding, like the white tissue is just stiffening. Okay, if you do a pressing, it's the same thing. So you press and then tension ramps up and then it's just, right? But what happens if you go into a load and the load is dynamic? The red tissue is holding, so the nervous system is holding into that tissue. So it's biasing the force from an internal perspective into the white tissue, but the load is doing this. So when the load is doing this, the white connective tissue is having to try to actually dissipate that.
Yes. So what would happen if, say it's a heavy med bag, you throw the med bag, then you catch the med bag in that position?
Yes.
You know, so that's kind of what I was thinking with the med ball type of thing. Like,
yes,
that med ball would be shitty, but the heavy bag would make more sense because it's more control. It's easier to control.
Yeah, for sure. So listen, the med ball is actually technically a great example because it's going to teach the connective. So remember when like whatever the band is doing, the connective tissue is doing to a degree, like it's in this setting. Yeah. Okay. Like, so if the band is oscillating like this, right? So if I have somebody that can't feel their anterior hip, they can't feel their capsule, I can wrap a band around it and start to use band tension to then start to like oscillate that tissue. And they go, oh yeah, I don't feel the behavior of length in my hip joint capsule because it's abnormal, but I feel the stress stiffening, which is a different behavior. So it's not right. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I know it's very nuanced for people that are listening, but in the clinical setting, this is going to really accelerate the effects that you can do, because think about it, if I'm trying to treat a capsule and you can't feel it, how are you going to funnel force into it?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm fucked.
Yeah.
So I have to have some way for you to feel what that is. So essentially what we did in a lot of this, like I said, Jim Seitzer's really helped us out with this, Dr. Shivers, is we took, so let's say that you have a band bell, but let's use a Rhino Flex Bar, something's a little bit sturdier. Right. And let's say that you have a kettlebell suspended in the band. So you get a band that's suspended, right? When you go to do that eccentric catch, that thing's going to.
Okay. I was missing the eccentric catch part.
Yeah.
All right. Now I get what you're saying. So yeah.
Boom. Right. And then think about it like technically that because of that the load is going to keep moving. So like your tissue is stopped, but now it's going to move and then it's going to oscillate back and forth until it dissipates. Well, where did it dissipate? You're doing an isometric, dissipate in the white connective.
Yeah. I mean, on the extreme end of that would be, there were times with Louie to where on our speed benches, we're basically just dropping the bar and catching it an inch off our chest.
Yes.
You know, then reversing from there. I mean, that's an extreme end of what we're talking about, which probably wouldn't recommend to somebody unless they, you know, if they're fucked up. Yeah. Probably wouldn't be, well, maybe light, you know, but the Rhino bar would be way better for the application that you're talking about.
Yeah. And so the catch.
Yes.
Okay. So the catch, so the isometric review showed us that if you hold an isometric for 3 to 4 seconds, the duration of the isometric is 3 to 4 seconds, enough force goes into the white connective tissue to stimulate change in the connective tissue.
So the catch should be held, you know, not just a radical reverse.
Correct.
Got it.
Right. And when you catch, right, because because like the overspeed eccentric and the catches that you guys were doing, because they were so brief, it was just kind of like the nervous system's like, oh, catch here. But you know, like when you do repeated efforts, you do it for like there's a time under tension.
Yes.
like when you just do the catch and the reversal, it's like you're like the tissue, for sure, there's going to be connective tissue training effect, but it's not going to scale up the connective tissue. It's just like, like the reason why you guys do repeated efforts is because you don't get a muscular effect. You get some, if you're untrained, you get some muscular effect, but like, you're not going to get, like bodybuilders can't do max effort and dynamic because there's not enough time under tension. So in regards to these oscillating isometric muscle actions, when you do that 3 to 4 second hold, there's enough time into the connective tissue for it to actually like stimulate that tissue to adapt. So a lot of what we started doing specifically with the linemen is we started doing like essentially these catches and holds at all different degrees, and then they hold until all that force dissipates. Okay. Right. And so that's kind of a way we just instituted that kind of like this off season. So once again, it goes back to kind of the research.
No, this is so fucked up to me, right? Because my shoulder's jacked up, right? It's been jacked up forever. And, so I used a shoulder saver pad for years and years and years. And during the pandemic, one of the training partners I had would just give me all kinds of shit, bring a bar to your chest, bring a bar to your chest. And you'll see where I'm going with this, which is what you just said is like, holy fuck, this is exactly what I did. And I didn't even know I did it, is I would use the bamboo bar with the kettlebells, right? And the way that I never liked the way it was used for reps and shit like that. So it would be for one song. This is like old Louie shit. Like if you're going to do something for reps, just wait till the song's over and hope it's not Stairway to Heaven. And then you're going to do the set for the whole song. And the continuous reps were too boring to me. So I would hold, in different positions and then hold on my chest, in the most stretched position. And after doing that, after 3 or 4 weeks, I was able to get the bar to my chest again, right? And I never because I tried all kinds of other shit before that. Never put it until you just said that. I'm like, holy fuck, that's kind of what I did and didn't know. The intent wasn't there. The intent was just like, fuck it, I'm going to do this at the end of my workout because if anything, it's hard. Yeah. And and that makes sense. Right. No.
Yeah, for sure. And so man, this is a whole nother rabbit hole for maybe another time, but I'll just kind of bring this up because this is something that we've kind of been discussing at Absolute. So when I was at Westside, I would see that guys who, and I'm saying guys, right? But obviously the crew. Like whoever's there, male, female, right? like the individuals that had like dysfunctional joints and abnormal connective tissue would always self-select for a barbell other than steel. Okay. So like I said, I'm coming from the perspective that you actually have a high training IQ. And like, I'm never going to be able to so I need to use you as a feedback loop to really understand what you're saying so that then I can essentially maybe provide you with information that maybe you kind of knew worked, right? But we can kind of have this dialect where we're both kind of learning from each other because so much of the stuff that I learned is just through working with individuals like you that have super high training IQ. So what's interesting is, oh, hey, this guy's got, a shoulder issue. His bench isn't going up. Okay. And then you talk to him. Well, what are they doing? Well, they're doing some sort of band bell. Okay. And so I'm like, okay, this is interesting kind of so that listeners can understand. So we have an individual that has abnormal connective tissue, dysfunctional joint, but they're able to do the movement with a band bell and they can actually apply a significant amount of load if they wanted to as well. Right. And so that's when we started to kind of figure out that listen, there's resonance in resistance. Okay. So when you think about a steel barbell, there's resonance in it. And this is kind of where I'm really at the edge of my knowledge. And this is something that Dr. Shivers would really be able to talk about. I'm just going to talk about the general concept. Okay. And so what that means is what it means by resonance is if you and Brian Fox, one of my buddies, actually did this. If you take a band, a red mini band, right? And you tie it and you take it to length and you listen to it it's going to have a certain resonant frequency to it. So you'll be able to hear it. And then if you tie a knot in it and you take it to the same length, same band, you can hear the abnormal resonance in it. Okay. And so it got me thinking, right? Like, oh, I think that when because I work with a lot of guys that have abnormal connective tissue in season, and they're going, hey, this doesn't feel right. So I started to kind of put two and two together. Like what they're describing is they're saying that like the connective tissue is abnormal and it's driving this abnormal resonance into the nervous system. And then their nervous system is outputting with tightness to guard this tissue. So that, okay, does this make sense? Right. And then you know how you're saying like, listen, I don't know either. This is all like, this is kind of on the edge of what I know. Probably other people will know this, right? But I started to think like, okay, well, like think about it. We're discussing like accommodation and how like, hey, you have to change this, right? You have to, right? Okay, well, think about it. Like if the load is always static, right? That load of a steel barbell and steel plates is only going to resonate with certain tissues. And then what was driving adaptation at one point is now going to start to drive accommodation. Okay. You tracking me, right? And I would see this in the clinic, and that's why I would start to use bands in the clinic. Because I could see like, oh, hey, this person has abnormal connective tissue. Let me see if I can take a light band and match the resonance. And then when I load that abnormal connective tissue, right, they can feel that. And then I can start to go, hey, you feel that? That's your capsule. And they go, yeah. And I can, hey, can you put muscular effort into your capsule to hold it a little bit more? Can you pull it a little bit? Does this make sense? Right. And so I think what you're describing is a very tissue specific form of accommodation because the steel is too harsh for the soft tissue. Okay. And that's why, like, when you talk to somebody like Seitzer, right, who I've talked to extensively, because we're trying to figure out, like, why is it, like you're saying, why is it that you have abnormal connective tissue? You start to use these barbells and now you're starting to load through this. Well, it's because those oscillations are resonating with so much more tissue that's probably all not stimulated because does this make sense?
Yeah.
I know I kind of take us way too far out.
Yeah.
But to me, it's interesting because like I said, like, you're like, nobody is going to have all the perfect prerequisites to enter training, unless you're 12, 13, have no injury history, no pathology. Like these people don't actually exist. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's ways where you can keep loading the tissues and getting the actual like positive and favorable training effects by changing loads. So remember how when we said like a PALS is a load at length isometrically. So now we're talking about an oscillating load.
Yeah.
And that oscillating load you can do, but if it's static, you can't do it. So it's kind of crazy when you think, right? Because think about it, like we both know that like you have to keep training. You can't, a lot of people are just like, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to stop. I can't do that personally myself. So that's when you start to get all this, research where you're like, oh, that's interesting. It must be the oscillations. Well, those oscillations were more than likely one of the effects from a tissue perspective is it was probably stimulating other connective tissue. And that connective tissue is now actually getting stimulated when that connective tissue wouldn't have got stimulated with a regular steel barbell.
Yes. Man, we could talk forever, man. Were there any topics you want to talk about I didn't bring up?
I mean, we could talk forever. I think for this one, I think we covered, it was a great conversation.
No,
I learned a lot.
This is amazing. I got to have you back out again. How can people go about finding your resources and the Substack? Well, I wrote it down.
Yeah.
The absolute, I can't read my own right. Absolute Sports Science Substack.
Yeah.
And then where else can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. So my Instagram is jquintnmt. So like J Quint Neuromuscular Therapist. And then we have a Instagram for Lineman Special Strength, which is just Lineman Special Strength with like an underscore in each of them. We have an Instagram for Absolute Sports Science. And then I essentially work for Functional Range Systems. So the seminars that I was mentioning, like functional range conditioning, FRA, like all those are essentially like those all have Instagrams, like Functional Range Conditioning. The ISM, which is the one that I teach. We don't have an Instagram for that, but you can go to functional anatomy seminars. You can look at Olin Kreutz's Instagram for lineman special strength, Dr. Spina's Instagram, Dr. Shiver, like all these are all colleagues of mine and individuals that, like I've learned a lot from along the way. Right. So yeah. And then the Substack is Absolute, the Art and Science of High Performance, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put the links in the description. I have a gift for you here.
Oh,
There's a shirt in there.
Oh,
perfect. There's like a training log in there. The training log is made Pioneer or General Leathercraft, who makes our belts. I had made these special leather covers for that. But in the book, there's a coin that I give out to people that I feel embody the reason why I started the company in the first place, which is to live, learn, and pass on, which you do a phenomenal job and have been and will continue to do. And I don't sell them. I only give them to people that I feel deserve them. So you do a good rate. Keep doing what you're doing. Yeah. Thank you for coming out. We'll definitely have you back out again. We could talk for fucking 8 hours, man. And we're done.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All content you see on this channel and at EliteFTS.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to EliteFTS.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.